The sprawling cityscape of Tokyo stretches out under a clear sky, a silent testament to the ordinary world that existed just days before, a stark contrast to the intimate turmoil. A pair of hands, nimble and precise, dances across the keys of a grand piano, striking a complex and harmonious chord. The hands belong to a young man seated at the instrument within the Tokyo International University of the Arts music department. He appears deeply focused, though a subtle hint of concern crosses his features. He is Kazuya Nimi, a third-year student in the music department, continuing his practice with a slight, almost nervous, smile, his fingers moving with practiced grace. Suddenly, an older woman with glasses, a professor, interjects sharply, demanding to know what kind of fingering Kazuya is employing. She continues to scold him, insisting he practice more and be more conscious of his finger placement. Kazuya, looking downcast, apologizes while other students observe the exchange. He internally laments the impossibility of such a technique, thinking it's like asking a cat to play the piano. The professor then tells him that his parents would be saddened by such a performance. Kazuya, looking even more dejected, acknowledges her words, pondering why she would bring his parents into the discussion. He reflected on his family's legacy, understanding that his mother was a pianist and his father a conductor, and that he himself had been born into a family of musicians. Moments later, a girl approached him, questioning if his enrollment was truly not through connections, then softly chuckled, remarking on his lack of charm. As he walked away, the girl's words echoed in his mind, making him wonder why he couldn't simply ignore such comments. He kicked a discarded can in frustration. His frustration mounted, his face contorted in anger as he silently fumed, asserting that his parents had no right to dictate his path, and that he played because he wanted to. Continuing his walk, he noticed something on the ground near a row of trash bins, prompting him to bend down for a closer look. Suddenly, a man stumbled, scattering papers into the air, and Kazuya instinctively lunged forward, reaching out to catch the falling sheets. His attempt to help took a terrifying turn as a large bus bore down on them, forcing Kazuya to duck beneath its front bumper, narrowly avoiding a direct impact. He looked up, bewildered by the sudden danger. In the aftermath, Kazuya lay unconscious, as did the man he tried to save. Above them, a naked woman with long, flowing hair and sharp fangs materialized, her arms outstretched, urging them to remember, claiming their power was already present. The mysterious woman then felt a touch, as a hand gently caressed her lips, a familiar gesture. As the touch lingered, Kazuya began to stir, groaning softly as he slowly regained consciousness, looking around in confusion while the other man remained prone. He awoke in a strange forest, disoriented, and asked aloud where he was. A young boy with a topknot, carrying a stack of books, stood nearby, agitated. The boy explained that they were on the Algier family's private land, and that their presence there was dangerous. Kazuya, still processing, could only manage to question the name. Al? The boy, clearly anxious, urged him to come this way. Kazuya, still bewildered by the sudden change in his surroundings, could only offer a confused huh. He pulled out his phone, hoping for some clarity, but the screen displayed out of range. A wave of disbelief washed over him as he stared at the useless device. As they walked deeper into the unfamiliar woods, Kazuya pondered what could have possibly happened, realizing with a pang of concern that his sheet music might have been scattered during whatever strange event brought him here. He considered trying to retrieve the lost music, a flicker of his old life amidst the new, bewildering reality. The vast, open sky above seemed to mock his confusion, leaving him to wonder, is this here? Emerging from the dense forest, they found themselves on a grassy hillside overlooking a quaint village nestled in the valley below. A faint, ethereal glow emanated from the boy, unnoticed by Kazuya. The clouds drifted lazily across the sky, painting a serene picture that belied the strangeness of their situation. The village spread out before them, a tapestry of rooftops and ancient buildings, with a grand, imposing structure visible on a distant hill, hinting at a world far removed from his own. Their progress was abruptly halted by a sharp, authoritative voice from somewhere unseen, shouting, "Stop! You two!" Kazuya turned, startled by the sudden command. He found himself apprehended by a group of female knights, their leader, a stern young woman, recognizing the boy beside him as Peter. She demanded to know the identity of the man accompanying him, her gaze sharp and accusatory. He attempted to explain his predicament, but she cut him off, remarking on his peculiar attire, which seemed out of place in their world. He then inquired if she was a knight, a question that visibly angered her, prompting a sharp retort. She, however, was not amused, branding him a rude man. Startled by her intensity, he quickly tried to apologize. His apology was cut short as, in his haste, he accidentally tripped the boy, sending him sprawling to the ground. He immediately expressed his profound regret for the grave mistake. She, witnessing the mishap, declared that a detailed explanation was now necessary and ordered them to accompany her to the barracks. He looked on, a sense of dread settling in as he realized the gravity of their situation. As they were led away along a winding path towards a distant village, guarded by the knights, he wondered why they were being treated like common criminals. The knights, meanwhile, urged them to quicken their pace. He noticed the boy, Peter, seemed unusually submissive, a demeanor that puzzled him. Approaching the settlement, he pointed to a prominent structure, asking what it was. The boy identified it as a church. He then gestured towards a vast field, inquiring if it was a vineyard. As they were led through the village, he observed the expansive vineyards, a sight he found peculiar for Japan, and the unusual attire of the people they passed. He continued to scrutinize the villagers, noting their strange clothing and wondering about the customs of this unfamiliar place. Eventually, they were escorted to a building that was described as a police station or barracks, a structure of unfamiliar architecture. Inside, the night captain began her interrogation, demanding to know his name. He responded, stating his full name, Kinzuya Nimi. She found his name, particularly the Nimi Kinzuya part, to be quite unusual. He clarified that Nimi was his family name. Both the captain and the boy reacted with visible surprise and confusion to his explanation of possessing a family name. The captain, now standing, declared that men simply do not have family names in this world. He stared back, utterly bewildered by her statement, struggling to comprehend what she was implying. The captain elaborated, explaining that men are referred to as yoji, deemed useless, incapable of bearing children, and fit only for simple labor, asserting their biological inferiority. Another knight affirmed her words. He protested, insisting that he was different. Suddenly, the boy, terrified, prostrated himself on the floor, apologizing profusely for Kinzuya's perceived rudeness. Kinzuya watched, stunned and confused by the boy's extreme reaction and the very concept of rudeness in this context. He remained silent as the night captain explained her reasoning, stating that Kinzuya likely suffered from memory loss. She pressed him, asking why he thought otherwise. She continued, recalling that Kinzuya had seemed strange from the moment they met, appearing unfamiliar with the Algiers family estate and curiously observing common buildings and fruits along the way. The night captain expressed her disbelief, finding it absurd that he claimed not to know the Algiers family. Kinzuya, still deeply confused by the situation, decided it would be best to simply go along with their assumptions for the time being. The night captain then directly questioned Kinzuya about his origins, but he could only admit that he remembered nothing, not even his own name. Finding the situation troublesome, the night captain made a swift decision, declaring that Kinzuya would be sent to the coal mines as she began to write down the order. Kinzuya reacted with shock and disbelief, questioning why he was being arbitrarily sent to the coal mines. Beside him, Peter cried out Kinzuya's name in distress. Peter's face was contorted in terror, his eyes wide with fear at the prospect of Kinzuya's fate. Kinzuya, still protesting, pleaded with the night captain, asking if there wasn't another arrangement, perhaps a different room, for him. The night captain firmly stated that an unknown person could not simply be kept in a private room. Peter, desperate, tried to interject, but she cut him off, revealing that she had been looking for a man and would take Kinzuya to her own house. Peter was utterly shocked and protested, calling her decision absurd. She suddenly drew her sword, its tip aimed directly at Kinzuya. He stared, wide-eyed, as Peter, standing behind him, seemed to brace for an impact. The blade stopped mere inches from his face, its cold steel reflecting his terror. She glared, accusing him of impudence, while he, still reeling from the sudden aggression, finally grasped the gravity of his situation. As she maintained her aggressive stance, Kinzuya's mind raced, a chilling realization dawning upon him. This was no longer the peaceful Japan he knew. He had, without a doubt, stumbled into a perilous new world. His eyes wide with disbelief, he could only stammer a question, utterly bewildered by her actions. She merely smirked, observing his fear, and mockingly noted that both his voice and legs were trembling, finding his pathetic state amusing. He stared back, a flicker of recognition crossing his mind as he realized he had harbored a strange sense of unease about her from the very beginning. He then pointed an accusing finger, declaring that she bore an uncanny resemblance to a detestable woman from his university. She, in turn, covered her mouth, a hint of amusement playing on her lips. She scoffed at his audacity, remarking that for a man, he was far too arrogant, incapable of even wielding a true sword. Peter, desperate, urged Kinzuya to apologize immediately, but she dismissed the idea of sending him to the coal mines, declaring her intention to punish him right then and there. With a swift, powerful motion, she brought the sword down. Kinzuya's eyes widened in sheer terror, a chilling thought echoing in his mind. This was the end. Peter, too, recoiled in horror. Yet, just as the blade descended, Kinzuya's hands darted out, not to block, but to tickle her sides. The unexpected assault sent her into a fit of uncontrollable laughter, her stern demeanor completely shattered. As the night captain succumbed to an uncontrollable fit of laughter, Kinzuya could only stare in wide-eyed astonishment. She thrashed wildly, her sword clattering to the floor as Kinzuya continued his unexpected assault. Her subordinates and Peter watched, utterly bewildered by the scene unfolding before them. Her fellow knights, witnessing their captain's undignified state, cried out in alarm, questioning what had befallen her. Still caught in the throes of laughter, she internally questioned the strange sensation, realizing her fingers were moving on their own, compelled by the tickling. The sensation intensified, her body reacting involuntarily as Kinzuya's fingers continued their relentless assault. She pleaded for him to stop, recognizing the vulnerable spot he had found. Kinzuya's hand moved lower, eliciting another wave of uncontrollable laughter and pleas for him to cease. He wondered at the strange reaction his touch provoked. Tears streamed from her eyes as she gasped, admitting she had never experienced such an overwhelming and involuntary sensation before. He stared at his own hand, bewildered by its seemingly independent movement and the profound effect it had on her. She remained in a state of ticklish torment beside him. The other knights, finally stirring from their shock, began to question the bizarre spectacle, wondering what exactly was happening to their captain. Marie Dorrance, the head maid of the Algiers family, presented herself with a polite bow, her demeanor composed and attentive. He found himself in a new setting, seated on a bench, surrounded by Marie and a retinue of women, some in maid attire, others in the uniforms of knights, all observing him with varying expressions. One of the women, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and curiosity, wondered silently about the man before them. He, too, was still processing the events, a profound realization dawning upon him. He had never imagined he would wield such an unusual power with his fingers. As he sat amidst the attentive women, Kazuya reflected on his unexpected journey, musing on the irony of becoming a master in this new world. This was merely the beginning of the first chapter. The finger is free. She fixed her gaze upon him, questioning what exactly had transpired. The maid guards then began to explain the events, detailing how their captain had attempted to cut down the other woman. As they spoke, the woman who had been attacked suddenly found her legs giving out, collapsing into the man's arms. The maid leader, now kneeling, looked at the man, asking why the woman had not been cut down as intended. He began to explain. He stood firm, still cradling the collapsed woman, as one of the maid guards accused him of resisting the captain. The maid leader, observing the scene, acknowledged that the man's appearance had indeed changed and noted his claim to the name Nimi, a statement that seemed to surprise the subordinate maid. He, however, found himself utterly bewildered by the mention of a family name and the entire unfolding situation. As he struggled to comprehend, the subordinate maid explained that they had been searching for him and invited him to the Algiers house. He, still focused on his predicament, questioned how he could possibly return home. Suddenly, the woman who had collapsed was on her feet, frantically warning him that they would be killed if they remained. He, however, dismissed her fears, telling her she was speaking nonsense. He then asserted that his previous actions were nothing more than legitimate self-defense, emphasizing that he had only touched her lightly. The maid leader listened intently, her expression thoughtful as she processed his explanation. He reiterated his claim of merely touching the woman, who now stood beside him with a look of exasperation. The maid leader, having heard enough, acknowledged his statement. With a calm demeanor, the maid leader then revealed that she had some idea of his true identity and instructed him to accompany her. As he processed her words, the woman leaned against him, asking if he was all right, while he remained in a daze. He looked down, a new question forming in his mind. Did she truly know something about him? The maid subordinate, her expression serious, spoke with an air of sudden gravity, questioning the male protagonist's identity and purpose. He followed the maid subordinate and her companions through an archway, heading deeper into the estate as she directed him to proceed. They arrived at a peculiar sight, a carriage, not pulled by animals, but by several muscular men who flexed their arms with pride. He looked on, bewildered by the unusual mode of transport. She explained that it was indeed a carriage, but specifically a man-powered carriage, asking if he had never seen one before. He looked at her, his expression a mix of confusion and disbelief, repeating the term man-powered, as if trying to grasp its meaning. She then inquired about his opinion of the men from the Algiers house, who were responsible for pulling the carriage. He hesitated, unsure how to respond to such an unexpected question. As he attempted to board the carriage, one of the male guards quickly intervened, blocking his path and declaring that men were not permitted to ride inside. He had never heard of such a custom. She declared to the guard, Peter, that it was fine for today, and that she would be returning with Kazuya in the carriage. The guard reacted with a shocked exclamation, while Kazuya realized that his presence in the carriage was an unusual and perhaps problematic exception to their rules. Inside the carriage, he remained utterly confused, unable to comprehend what was considered acceptable or unacceptable in this strange new world. He sat in the carriage, still reeling from the maid's insistence, and questioned why he was being transported this way and where Peter had gone. The maid subordinate, seated opposite him, calmly explained that Peter was walking alongside them. He then wondered aloud if he was truly unable to return home. Before he could fully process his thoughts, the maid leaned forward, her face close to his, and pressed her lips against his in a sudden, unexpected kiss, leaving him utterly shocked. As he recoiled in surprise, she explained that the kiss was a means to confirm if he possessed a certain power. He could only utter a bewildered sound in response. The carriage continued its journey, rattling along. The maid mused internally that the captain's condition was similar to the hero's power described in ancient documents. Her gaze was sharp and focused as she considered the nature of this power. It was said to tempt those who touched it and charm those who were touched. Now sitting beside him, the maid calmly informed him that he would become her servant and her subject for research. He reacted with outrage, demanding to know if the kiss had been a contract. She confirmed that in her country, a kiss served as a binding agreement. She then challenged him to touch her and demonstrate the nature of his power, asserting that he had no other path to survival. He protested, insisting he was not her servant and that such an unreasonable contract was invalid. Frustrated by her persistent demands to treat him as a research subject, he decided to comply. He extended his hand, ready to touch her as she wished. The maid watched him, her expression unreadable, as if evaluating the extent of his abilities. As his hand made contact, nothing seemed to happen. He stared, bewildered, wondering if his power had failed to activate. Even after Kazuya's attempt to activate his supposed power, the maid subordinate remained in a state of profound distress, her eyes closed, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps as a deep blush spread across her face. He then questioned her, his expression stern, asking if she could truly endure this situation. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and discomfort, as if trapped. She continued to struggle, her hands instinctively clutching at her chest, her breathing still heavy and uneven. Observing her distress, he began to understand the true nature of the contract, realizing that the maid leader's actions had pushed her to her absolute limit. He mused that this must be the extent of her endurance. His frustration mounting, he resolved to find a way out of this predicament. He thought to himself that he would do whatever it took to escape, even if it meant extracting information about how to return home. He then reached out, contemplating the contract's power to enthrall those who touched it, or rather, those who were touched by it. As he reached out, his hand landed on her thigh, causing her eyes to widen in shock and a fresh wave of blush to spread across her face. He continued his exploration, moving his hand further up her inner thigh. She gasped internally, realizing the intimate nature of his touch. The touch ignited a powerful reaction within her. A surge of energy, akin to electricity, coursed through her body, leaving her utterly shocked and visibly aroused. Moments later, he sat up, the maid subordinate leaning against him, her eyes still glazed with pleasure as she affectionately murmured his name. Her face still flushed, she explained that if he could acquire the Lunavail mirror, she was certain he would be able to return home. He looked at her, his expression a mix of surprise and curiosity, asking what this Lunavail mirror was. He listened intently as the maid subordinate, still under the influence of his hero's power, explained the Lunavail mirror. She revealed it was a legendary item, said to grant any wish. Kazuya, surprised by her sudden directness, wondered if this was truly the mirror she spoke of. He wondered if his power extended beyond her physical form, captivating even her mind. He pressed further, asking where the Lunavail mirror could be found. She admitted she did not know its precise location. She then suggested that ancient texts might contain clues to its whereabouts. Kazuya immediately inquired about the location of these ancient documents. She pointed towards a magnificent, sprawling estate in the distance, identifying it as the Uyashiki, the Grand Mansion. A carriage departed, carrying Kazuya and the maids towards their new destination. Upon their arrival, Kazuya gazed up at the imposing structure, marveling at the sheer scale of the Uyashiki. The grand edifice stood majestically, its intricate architecture hinting at centuries of history and untold secrets. He and the maid subordinate stood in the expansive courtyard, taking in the full view of the mansion before them. Suddenly, a door creaked open, and a male servant emerged, sternly instructing Kazuya, as a newcomer, to line up, for the young lady of the house was about to depart. A young woman, elegant in her wide-brimmed hat and flowing dress, winked playfully as she observed the surroundings. She mused aloud, finding the men quite splendid today. This elegant young lady was Cheryl Algiers, the esteemed Ojisama of the Algiers family. Cheryl then stood at the top of a grand staircase within the Uyashiki, maids flanking her, as a multitude of men lay prostrate on the floor below. She commanded them not to look at her face. Among the prostrated, Kazuya lay face down, his mind reeling as he questioned why he was forced into such a humiliating position. Kazuya, now seemingly in another world, listened intently as the maid leader, Marie, recounted the history of this new realm. Meanwhile, the young woman he had touched earlier found herself overwhelmed by a profound, pleasant sensation, a direct consequence of his mysterious power. Still pondering his desire to return home, Kazuya was interrupted by the arrival of a grand carriage, which pulled up before an imposing mansion. As he bowed his head, a young woman with long, light hair and an elegant hat introduced herself as Cheryl Algiers, the Ojisama of the Algiers family, remarking that men were easily swayed. Cheryl, flanked by two maids, walked through a courtyard where several men lay prostrate before her. She questioned aloud why these men were bowing to a young lady like herself. A maid, observing her mistress, inquired if something was amiss, but Cheryl simply replied that nothing was wrong. The maid leader then informed Cheryl that a new guest had arrived today. Cheryl's gaze fell upon Kazuya, who remained bowed, and she wondered if he was the man who had been at their house. With a bright smile, she declared that they should hold a welcome party. Still on his knees, Kazuya internally reacted to the idea of a welcome party, feeling a sense of relief that he wasn't immediately being sent away, or worse. Cheryl then commanded him to put on her shoes, stating that it was not good for him to remain without doing so. Kazuya remained prostrate, while a maid stood nearby. She looked down at the prostrate Kazuya, her expression one of mild impatience. She questioned how he could be so useless, unable to perform even such a simple task. Kazuya, still on the floor, internally struggled with the demand. He remained on his hands and knees, his gaze fixed on the floor, contemplating the humiliating request to put on her shoes. He knew he was being called a thing, and that he was expected to obey. He hesitated, his brow furrowed in distress as he looked towards her foot, the task weighing heavily on him. Around them, the sheer number of maid guards, some standing at attention with spears and others already prostrate in subservience, made the situation clear. Resistance was futile, the odds were overwhelmingly against him. He glanced at one of the maid guards, who held her spear firmly, and understood the unspoken threat. To defy Cheryl would likely result in his swift and unceremonious execution, without even a trial. He clenched his fist, cursing the unbearable humiliation he was forced to endure. Cheryl and the maid subordinate watched him, both wearing faint, knowing smiles. With a forced, strained smile that barely masked his inner turmoil, he declared his willingness to comply, his face slick with sweat. He began the humiliating task of putting on Cheryl's shoe, while the maid subordinate stood by. Cheryl watched him, a satisfied smile gracing her lips. As he performed the task, Kazuya thought to himself that this subservience, however degrading, was still preferable to death, his gaze briefly drifting towards the grand Algiers mansion in the distance. However, just as he was about to complete the act, the maid leader suddenly intervened, placing a hand on his back and ordering him to stop. The maid subordinate looked on, visibly surprised by the unexpected interruption. The maid leader, with a stern expression, addressed Cheryl Algiers, apologizing for the current situation and explaining that the new arrival, Kazuya, would be ready by tomorrow. She then questioned Cheryl's insistence on this matter, asserting her authority. The maid subordinate stood nearby, while Kazuya remained prostrate. Cheryl, clearly displeased by the maid leader's intervention, puffed out her cheeks and pouted in frustration. A grand mansion stood under a cloudy sky, as if a new day had dawned, or perhaps a significant passage of time had occurred. Moments later, Kazuya and the maid subordinate stood outside the mansion. He expressed his gratitude for her help earlier. She simply replied, "No." She then asked him if he was truly all right, suggesting that perhaps things were not well. Kazuya, confused, asked why she thought so, admitting he didn't understand. The maid subordinate, blushing slightly, confessed that she couldn't just stand by and watch him endure such humiliation. Kazuya's eyes widened in surprise at her unexpected admission. He then noticed her lifting her skirt, revealing her legs and frilly undergarments. She explained that she couldn't forget what happened in the car earlier, implying a connection to his previous humiliation. He wondered if this was related to the finger-pointing incident. She then extended her hand towards him, her expression still somewhat shy. Kazuya, still processing, looked at her as he watched her, still leaning against the wall in a state of arousal. She confirmed that the experience had been even better than before. His expression shifted to one of utter shock and bewilderment. He retreated into his own mind, grappling with the bizarre reality. He pondered how his own fingers, which had been deemed clumsy and useless at university, could have such a profound effect on her. This world, he realized, was truly incomprehensible. She then turned her gaze back to Kazuya, still on all fours, her eyes filled with lingering desire. She wondered aloud if this power he possessed could be something significant, before calling out his name once more. Her desire remained unquenched, and with a blush, she softly asked him to do it again, her expression a mix of longing and anticipation. He looked on in stunned silence as she approached him from behind, whispering into his ear. She declared that he would now be her subordinate and her research subject, solidifying a new, unexpected dynamic between them. The maid subordinate, looking somewhat flustered, was asked about the ancient document detailing the location of the mirror of Lunavail. She seemed hesitant to answer, only managing a soft, that is. Meanwhile, Kazuya found himself in a lavish bedroom, peering out from behind a curtain, seemingly searching for something. The room was clearly the young lady's private chambers. He recalled that the maid leader, Mary, had gone out, and he needed to act quickly. He believed the item he sought was somewhere in this vicinity. Kazuya began his search, looking under the bed, then pulling out a drawer from a small table, and finally rummaging through a desk. The maid subordinate then entered the room, questioning what he was doing. He asked her where the item was, but she replied that it was strange, implying it wasn't where it should be. She paused, a finger to her chin, as a realization dawned on her. She remembered a small box that had been by the pillow. Just then, Cheryl Algiers, the young lady of the house, appeared, asking the maid subordinate, "Mary, what are you doing?" The maid subordinate, startled, exclaimed, "Oju-sama." Cheryl, looking somewhat displeased, stated that she had just returned. The maid subordinate, looking downcast, explained that she had merely been tidying up a little. Cheryl then declared she was tired and did not need tea, intending to go to sleep. The maid subordinate, looking relieved, acknowledged her mistress's wishes and offered to prepare tea immediately. Cheryl, now in her night clothes, stretched languidly, seemingly unwinding after a long day. Cheryl, now settled in her bed, had just returned, catching Kazuya and the maid subordinate off guard. Kazuya, hidden beneath the bed, felt a surge of panic, wondering how they would escape this predicament. His hidden companion, the maid subordinate, also stood frozen, her mind racing with the dire consequences should their clandestine search be discovered. She knew not what fate awaited them if their secret was revealed. As the tension mounted, Cheryl bid the maid subordinate good night, her voice calm and unsuspecting. The maid subordinate, maintaining her composure, returned the farewell, addressing Cheryl respectfully before turning to leave the room. With the maid subordinate gone, Cheryl finally drifted off to sleep, her breathing evening out. Kazuya, still concealed beneath the bed, cautiously peered out, assessing the quiet room. Outside the grand mansion, the maid subordinate stood alone in the night, her face etched with distress. She cried out desperately for Marie, her voice echoing in the darkness, clearly overwhelmed by the events that had just transpired. The Mirror of Dreams, also known as the Lunavail Mirror, was said to grant any wish. It was in pursuit of an ancient document that spoke of such a mirror that Kazuya and the female protagonist had infiltrated Cheryl's bedroom. He found himself in a precarious situation, startled by the sudden turn of events, while the female protagonist remained asleep in the bed. Quickly, he ducked down, scrambling to hide himself completely beneath the large bed. He knew he had to escape without being discovered, for he could not predict what might happen if he were found. Meanwhile, the female protagonist, still in bed, recalled a small box that had been near the pillow. He cautiously peeked out from under the bed, observing his surroundings. His gaze fell upon an ornate chest, noticing a distinct keyhole on its front. He realized with frustration that he couldn't open it without a key, despite the possibility that the ancient document they sought might be inside. With no immediate solution, he retreated further back under the bed, contemplating his next move should he be discovered. He considered using his power, but a moment of hesitation gripped him. He realized his ability might not affect everyone, and if he were to use it, it could draw unwanted attention before he even managed to touch the chest. He decided a tactical retreat was necessary for now. With that thought, he began to carefully back away from the bed, moving stealthily across the room while Cheryl remained deeply asleep. Suddenly, she stirred, letting out a soft, sleepy murmur. He froze, his eyes wide with alarm, fearing discovery. As she shifted, a small, ornate key slipped from her hand and landed on the bed beside her. He immediately recognized it, realizing it must be the key to the locked chest he had found earlier. He cautiously reached out, his fingers hovering near the key, while she continued to murmur softly in her sleep, still unaware. With extreme care, he attempted to retrieve the key from beside her sleeping form, his movements slow and deliberate. Finally, with a subtle click, the long, ornate key came free, gleaming brightly in his grasp. He held it aloft, a wide grin spreading across his face as he exclaimed his success. A wave of self-satisfaction washed over him. He had proven himself capable. Just as he savored his triumph, Cheryl sat up beside him, rubbing her eyes, seemingly oblivious to the ordeal he had just endured to retrieve the key he now held. He found himself in a precarious situation as Cheryl, now fully awake, let out a piercing scream, accusing him of being a pervert. He, in turn, cried out in utter disbelief, questioning what was happening. Following the chaotic outburst, Cheryl stood imperiously, pointing an accusing finger directly at him. Her judgment was swift and severe. He would face the death penalty the very next day. Imprisoned behind bars, he could only stare back in utter shock. He had infiltrated Cheryl's room, seeking to acquire ancient documents. Regrettably, his attempt had failed, and he found himself thrown into a prison cell. Suddenly, his gaze shot upwards as a heavy boot landed with a thud nearby. Standing before him, the protagonist female glared, her voice sharp with indignation. She accused him of brazenly invading her room and, to add insult to injury, having the audacity to strip off his clothes. He stammered, attempting to explain that his presence was merely a coincidence, that he had simply been taking a walk around the mansion. Despite his predicament, a small, triumphant thought flickered through his mind. He had managed to pilfer the key without anyone noticing. She let out a frustrated sigh, seemingly dismissing his flimsy excuse. As she turned to leave, a chilling thought crossed her mind. He would be gone by tomorrow anyway. His eyes widened in surprise at her words. Suddenly, she spun back, her face contorted in a terrifying rage. She declared that after 100 beatings, he would face the ultimate punishment, burning at the stake. Kazuya recoiled in sheer terror. With that pronouncement, she walked away once more, instructing him to tremble until the next day. A cold dread settled over Kazuya as he realized the gravity of his situation. He gripped the cold bars of his cell, his face contorted in a desperate resolve. He would absolutely not allow himself to die here. He paced within the confines of his small prison, his gaze fixed on the barred window. He knew he had to find a way to escape, somehow. He peered through the window, realizing that this particular opening connected directly to the outside world. Still peering out, he heard a distant voice call out, "Hey!" Outside the prison, amidst the trees, two voices could be heard discussing his whereabouts. "Mary-san," one said, followed by another, "Peter." His attention snapped back to the cell door as he heard approaching footsteps. A voice confirmed, Kazuya was here. The heavy boots continued their rhythmic advance. The captain of the 3rd District Unit, Lunavail, approached with a confident stride, adjusting her hair. She seemed to dismiss any concerns, thinking to herself that everything was fine. He recoiled in shock as he recognized her. "You, the police from earlier," he exclaimed, his voice laced with disbelief. Elena stood before his cell, her presence commanding. He demanded to know, "Why are you here?" She simply stated her name. "I am Elena Slaval." Her gaze sharpened, fixing him with an intense stare. "You, what did you do to me during the day?" she pressed, leaving him utterly surprised by the accusation. She glared at Kazuya, demanding answers and accusing him of making her look like a fool. Kazuya, startled, tried to deny something about his hand. His surprise grew as Elena's hand deftly manipulated the lock on his cell door, her gaze fixed on him as she declared he surely had something hidden. Moments later, Elena stepped into the cell, a whip now in her hand, threatening to extract his secrets by force. Kazuya's eyes widened in terror at the sight of the weapon. She then revealed that Cheryl-sama had informed her of Kazuya's punishment, 1,000 lashes. Kazuya, aghast, questioned the severity of such a sentence. Elena, with a stern expression, declared she had permission to execute the punishment immediately, dismissing Kazuya's protest that she had promised it would be tomorrow. With a fierce resolve, she brandished the whip, vowing to beat him until he confessed, commanding him to prepare himself for the ordeal. As the whip cracked, Kazuya swiftly dodged the strike, exclaiming that he could not possibly endure such a brutal punishment. Elena continued her relentless assault, swinging the whip with full force. Kazuya, however, met her attack with a determined gaze, clenching his fist as if preparing to counter, a stance that seemed to surprise her. With an unexpected display of strength, Kazuya caught the whip midair with his bare hand, gripping it firmly, leaving Elena visibly stunned by his defiance. He pulled with all his might, a determined expression on his face, urging, "Come here." The sudden force sent her reeling backward, a surprised gasp escaping her lips as her hand reached out in vain. In an instant, he had her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, securing her as he declared, "Caught you." Her grip had failed, and the whip, once a symbol of her authority, now slipped from her fingers. A wave of shock and embarrassment washed over her face, her eyes wide with disbelief and a flush rising to her cheeks. Still held firmly from behind, she struggled against his grasp, pleading for him to stop. Meanwhile, the discarded whip lay on the ground, forgotten as he continued to hold her, questioning her struggle. "What is it?" The whip lay abandoned, a silent testament to her failed attempt at punishment. Finally, she found herself on the ground, still held by him, her face a mix of frustration and mortification as she demanded to know, "Why are you so rebellious?" He looked down at her, his eyes narrowing with a cold intensity, a thought echoing in his mind. "Not again." A young woman lay sprawled, her expression a mix of frustration and vulnerability as she looked up, seemingly trapped. Above her, a young man pinned her down, his own thoughts betraying a struggle as he realized his hands were moving on their own, repeating a forbidden action. His hand, seemingly independent of his will, stretched out, unable to stop its advance. The young woman, however, refused to yield, her eyes blazing with defiance as she declared she would not let this happen to her again. Despite her resistance, the hand continued its relentless movement, reaching for the fabric covering her chest. He pressed down on her, his body a heavy weight, as she struggled beneath him, her cries of distress echoing in the confined space. A sudden jolt of realization struck him, a sense of alarm washing over his face as he questioned what had just happened, desperately urging himself to stop. She, too, looked up in shock, her mouth agape. The female student, having initiated the encounter, now lay on the ground, seemingly unconscious or passed out. The male attacker looked down at her with wide, shocked eyes, a clear expression of surprise on his face. Moments later, she was resting on a bed, while he sat beside her, looking at her with concern. From behind a set of bars, a maid observed them, asking if it was over. He turned to the maid, calling out her name, Mary, with a questioning tone. She responded, her expression serious, stating that there was no more time. The maid, Mary, continued, informing him that Lady Cheryl was proceeding with preparations for punishment. He expressed disbelief, questioning the maid's words. She explained that they, the maids, were not allowed to touch Lady Cheryl, implying a strict rule or hierarchy. Mary then warned him that his life was now like a flickering candle in the wind, implying extreme danger. He looked at her with a stunned, wide-eyed expression, realizing the gravity of his situation. Several days passed. The male attacker sat on the bed, looking dejected, while the female student rested beside him, still seemingly unconscious or recovering. Mary stood nearby, observing them, stating that it must be difficult, but there was nothing else that could be done. The focus shifted to a display of various delicate lingerie, one white with floral patterns and another black with lace, suggesting a change in circumstances or a new development related to the women. He found himself surrounded by a group of women, some in elegant dresses, others in revealing lingerie, all looking at him. He questioned aloud what had happened, utterly bewildered by the situation. Meanwhile, in a different location, a young boy named Kazuya lay on the floor, having seemingly fallen. A small girl called out his name with concern as he looked at his own hand, perhaps in confusion or dawning realization. Elsewhere, a maid stood resolute, her thoughts grim. There's no more time. If it comes to this, I'll do anything to survive. In the background, other figures were seen preparing what was described as a punishment for Cheryl-sama. Back in the cell, Kazuya's face was etched with worry as he silently questioned, "What should I do?" The maid, now standing before Kazuya and the young girl in what appeared to be a prison cell, declared her new allegiance. "From now on, I will absolutely obey Cheryl-sama." She then inquired if Kazuya possessed any special skills. He acknowledged her words, and she pressed on, explaining that he needed to appeal to their captors with something unique. She repeated her question, asking if he had any special skills. Later, Kazuya sat before a grand piano, his expression thoughtful as he pondered the maid's words, repeating to himself, "Special skill." He touched his neck, a gesture of frustration, as he concluded, "No, piano is not my forte." He proudly declared that he had become quite skilled at serving delicious tea at home, but then internally chastised himself, realizing such a simple skill might not be enough. The maid, Mary, reacted with astonishment, questioning if he could truly serve tea, and if men were even permitted to do so in this world. She then pondered if his ability was more than just a good impression. She considered the possibility that there might still be a chance for him, while Kazuya looked on, confused. Mary then averted her gaze, a hint of disappointment or resignation on her face. Meanwhile, in a grand hall, a young woman named Cheryl sat upon a throne, her expression one of annoyance as she questioned the notion of a dance party escort, particularly if it involved Kazuya. Within the opulent hall, Cheryl, still seated on her throne, directly addressed Mary, asking if she was serious about her proposal. Kazuya remained prostrate on the floor as Mary affirmed her stance. She considered Kazuya's ability to serve tea, acknowledging that for a man, he possessed a considerable degree of intelligence. Still displeased, Cheryl declared that such rudeness was unforgivable. Mary, however, attempted to interject, beginning to explain her reasoning. Her gaze then shifted to Mary, and Cheryl remarked on the maid's unusual hair color. Elsewhere, Kazuya remained prostrate, his mind racing as he silently questioned the meaning of a dance party. He found himself confined within a cell, while a map of the country's various territories was displayed. The chronicler explained that the lords of each territory would soon gather for a grand party, and it was a significant status symbol to bring a high-ranking man. Kazuya, still bewildered, wondered what this status truly entailed. He listened as Cheryl remarked on his skill and hair, comparing him to a dog. He internally agreed, feeling like a mere animal. He clenched his teeth, his mind racing with the thought that he would do anything to survive in this place. Meanwhile, Cheryl, seated on her throne, acknowledged Mary's point about Kazuya, then turned to a new attendant, Elena, asking for her opinion. Elena, looking distressed, stated that she did not care what happened to Kazuya, but then hesitated, her expression softening slightly. Kazuya remained prostrate before them. Elena's face flushed with anger and embarrassment as she declared that if they insisted on keeping him alive, she would personally watch over him all day. She continued, asserting that she had no interest in such a man, while Mary stood by, observing her. Cheryl, still on her throne, looked at Elena with a questioning gaze, remarking that she seemed strange. She then dismissed the matter, saying it was fine. Kazuya, still on the floor, looked up as a foot, presumably Cheryl's, pressed down near him. He wondered what was happening. Cheryl, standing over the prostrate Kazuya, asked him what he intended to do, while Mary watched silently. Suddenly, Kazuya was struck by an invisible force, sending him flying across the room. He cried out in pain as he hit the ground, gasping. He remained prostrate on the opulent floor, his face pressed against the cold tiles, as the young ruler Cheryl and her attendants, Elena and a maid, stood over him. He could only perceive the scene before his eyes, a tableau of his utter humiliation. His humiliation continued as a small, elegant shoe, likely Cheryl's, rested mere inches from his head, a stark symbol of his subjugation. As he endured this abject position, a surge of defiance caused his fist to clench tightly. Elena, observing him, wore a look of annoyance mixed with a hint of concern, while the maid maintained a serious, watchful expression. The young ruler's presence loomed over him, a dark silhouette of absolute authority against the grand backdrop of the hall, further emphasizing his complete submission. Despite his abject position, he looked up, a flicker of determination in his eyes, as the other women in the hall continued to observe the unfolding drama. A maid then intervened, addressing Cheryl and suggesting it was time to proceed. His hand, still clenched, trembled slightly. Meanwhile, Elena observed the scene with a smug, knowing smile, a silent thought crossing her mind that men were, after all, foolish. Cheryl then addressed him directly, her voice sharp, asking if he truly believed such an act would spare him punishment. He reacted with a gasp of surprise and a surge of anger. She then added, with a saccharine tone, that she was, in fact, very kind. From her throne, she delivered her final judgment, declaring that as a reward, she would allow him to live until the dance party. He remained prostrate, his mind reeling from the implications of her words. Thus, he was led away, a leash now fastened around his neck, held firmly by Cheryl. He was to be taken to the dance party, not as an escort, but as her personal dog, a symbol of her absolute dominion. Across the vast expanse of the country, the lords of each territory were preparing to gather for a grand dance party. In the opulent throne room, the young ruler, Cheryl, declared that bringing a man of poor quality would negatively impact one's status. Kazuya, kneeling before her, internally reflected that he had somehow managed to postpone his punishment for such a reason. Outside, the Grand Palace stood as a testament to the country's power, a place where Kazuya was now destined to accompany Lady Cheryl as a mere spectacle. Meanwhile, a group of young women, likely attendants, watched with wide, surprised eyes as events unfolded. Later, Kazuya diligently served tea to Cheryl, offering a polite apology for the wait. She responded with a simple, satisfied hum. The group of women from before continued to observe, expressing their astonishment at the sight of a man serving tea, remarking that such a display was to be expected from the Algiers family. As he stood, Kazuya became the subject of curious whispers from a small crowd, who noted his rare hair color and expressed a desire to have someone like him for themselves, wondering what possibilities this presented. A subtle smile played on his lips as he considered the implications, wondering if this newfound attention could be his chance to avoid punishment. Cheryl, observing the situation, confirmed that events were unfolding precisely as she had anticipated, instructing Kazuya to perform his role well. He acknowledged her command, understanding that his performance was crucial to avoid bringing shame upon his lady, Cheryl, as they stood in the grand hall surrounded by onlookers. He found himself amidst a grand gathering, the opulent hall filled with guests. A soft melody drifted through the air, and he wondered if it was a piano. Indeed, a young woman sat at a grand piano, her fingers dancing across the keys, producing the beautiful sound. He realized that such instruments existed even in this world. As he pondered this, a voice from nearby urged him to pay attention. He looked on, a thoughtful expression on his face. His gaze shifted to a small stage where two young girls, one of them Lady Cheryl, presented two muscular men performing feats of strength and agility. One man balanced on his hands, while the other knelt, holding a plate. The girls proudly declared that their men could perform such tricks, even standing on their heads. He watched the spectacle, a grimace forming on his face as he internally remarked that the treatment of men here was truly no different from that of dogs. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the hall, Elena, one of Cheryl's attendants, sat with a teacup, her attention suddenly drawn by the sound of a high-heeled shoe clicking nearby. The sound heralded the arrival of a new figure, Lady Laura Rougerie, who greeted Lord Algiers with a polite, yet perhaps overly sweet, tone. Lady Cheryl, observing the newcomer, offered her own greeting to Lady Rougerie, a sharp, knowing smile playing on her lips. Laura Rougerie approached Cheryl, expressing concern that Cheryl had not been feeling well lately. Cheryl, however, seemed to bristle at the implied criticism, a tense energy crackling between them. She wondered aloud about the sudden change in atmosphere. Laura dismissed Cheryl's concern, stating she was merely looking forward to something, and then, with a chilling smile, advised Cheryl to pray in her mother's name. Cheryl, matching her smile, assured Laura that she would soon be removed from her position. She stood beside Elena, who questioned the identity of the person accompanying them. The maid, Mary, also wondered aloud about the newcomer. Meanwhile, the maid explained that the woman they had just seen was Lady Laura Rougerie, the feudal lord of the Northern Territories, whose family had recently gained significant power through the production of wool. As the maid finished her explanation, she turned to Kazuya, asking if he and Lady Cheryl were close. He looked towards Cheryl, who remained silent, her expression unreadable. The maid continued, revealing that the Algiers family, Cheryl's lineage, had once been exceptionally prosperous. She elaborated, explaining that Cheryl's mother was the previous head of the family. However, due to a succession of poor harvests and other climatic influences, their current situation was dire. The maid concluded her somber account by stating that Cheryl was constantly compared to her parents, a burden she had to bear. Just as Kazuya processed this information, Lara Rougerie approached them, her gaze fixed on him, a subtle smirk playing on her lips. She smiled broadly, covering her mouth with her fan, and wondered aloud if Kazuya was a man from the Algiers family, remarking on how pitiful he seemed. Cheryl, visibly distressed by Lara's taunts, cried out that Kazuya had spilled tea on her and ruined her hair. Kazuya, kneeling, tried to wipe her hair clean, while Lara Rougerie watched with a knowing smirk. Lara Rougerie then turned to the surrounding noble women, agreeing that Kazuya's hair color was indeed not beautiful, implying his presence was a further embarrassment to Cheryl. The other women looked on, some with amusement, others with surprise. Her words, still echoing, were a stark contrast to the current situation. Kazuya, standing beside Mary, listened as she explained that Lara Rougerie's earlier statements were different now, and that being associated with the Rougerie family was currently advantageous. Cheryl, however, looked away, a clear expression of frustration on her face, muttering about the sheer audacity of it all. Lara Rougerie, surrounded by other women, continued her verbal assault, looking down at Kazuya with disdain. She remarked that in the past, Cheryl had brought much more impressive men, implying Kazuya was a pitiful choice. Kazuya met her gaze, his expression unreadable, while the other women watched with keen interest. Moments later, Cheryl stood with her back to Kazuya, holding a leash in her hand. He watched her, a silent question in his eyes. Then, with a swift motion, the leash was around Kazuya's neck, a collar now binding him. He flinched, his eyes wide with shock and humiliation, as Cheryl looked at him, demanding to know what he was doing. The crowd began to murmur, their whispers filling the hall. Lara Rougerie watched with a smirk, fanning herself, while Mary and Cheryl observed the unfolding scene. Someone among the onlookers questioned if Kazuya was heading towards the piano, wondering aloud what he intended to do. Ignoring the stares and whispers, Kazuya began to run up the grand staircase towards the piano, where Cheryl stood. He thought to himself that his actions were not for her sake. He reached the instrument and sat down, his mind filled with irritation at everyone present. His hands hovered over the keys, a sense of unfamiliarity washing over him. It had been a long time since he had touched a piano, and the sensation felt strange. A close-up of his eye revealed a flicker of determination. He looked at the keys, questioning if he could still play well, but quickly dismissed the doubt. With a resolute expression, Kazuya began to play, realizing there was no other choice but to proceed. He began to play, and as the first notes resonated through the hall, a wave of astonishment swept over the assembled noblewomen. Lara Rougerie, who had orchestrated much of his humiliation, stared wide-eyed, her fan held uselessly in her hand, as if struck speechless by the unexpected sound. His fingers moved with an unexpected grace across the keys, producing a melody that filled the grand space. Below, Cheryl, who had placed him on the leash, seemed to shrink in the vastness of the room, her gaze fixed on the unfolding performance. In the grand hall, amidst the opulent decor, Kazuya sat before a magnificent piano. Several maids observed him, murmuring amongst themselves, questioning his identity and his right to be there, wondering if he was from the Algiers family. Lara Rougerie, holding her fan, expressed her disdain, declaring that the man from the Algiers family lacked proper decorum by sitting at the piano. Cheryl, nearby, looked on with a surprised expression, urging Lara to stop and asking what she thought she could do. A determined glint appeared in his eyes as he extended a hand, realizing his fingers were moving on their own, without his conscious command. Cheryl watched him, her cheeks flushing with a mixture of surprise and perhaps admiration, as if captivated by the unfolding event. His hands began to play, the keys responding to an unfamiliar touch. He internally noted that the keyboard felt much heavier than any he had encountered at the university. With increasing speed and precision, his fingers danced across the keys, producing a melody that filled the grand hall. His feet, still positioned at the piano, remained steady as the unexpected melody continued to flow from the instrument. The women gathered nearby exchanged bewildered glances, one remarking that she had never heard such a piece before, yet acknowledging its undeniable quality. Elsewhere in the room, 3 other women, including the maid, were utterly captivated, their faces flushed with emotion as they found the music simply wonderful. Lara Rougerie, however, watched with narrowed, scrutinizing eyes, her expression betraying a mix of suspicion and intense focus as she held her fan. Nearby, Cheryl, standing beside the maid, appeared equally perplexed, questioning the strange feelings stirring within her as the music played. The piano keys themselves seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy, their forms blurring as if resonating with the powerful melody, while even the distant, towering building appeared to shimmer under its influence. From above, the grand piano continued its performance, a small, central point of immense power within the vast space, its music echoing against the backdrop of the modern cityscape. Despite the ongoing performance, Kazuya remained slumped over the piano, his eyes closed, his hand still outstretched over the keys, a silent testament to the mysterious force guiding his fingers. He remained at the piano, looking up with a surprised expression, as if just realizing the profound impact his performance was having on the growing audience. His performance continued to enthrall, drawing the audience into a state of ecstatic admiration. Many reached out, captivated by the melody, while others, like the group of young women, openly expressed their awe, wondering at his skill and the beautiful piece he played. The captivating melody drew the audience closer, forming a dense throng around Kazuya, who remained at the piano. From a slight distance, Cheryl and Lara observed the scene, their expressions unreadable amidst the chaos. As the crowd swarmed Kazuya, Cheryl and Lara remained at a slight distance, both watching the unfolding spectacle. Lara's brow furrowed in thought, her gaze fixed on the young pianist. Lara, still observing, voiced her skepticism, remarking that Kazuya was merely a well-trained performer, and she found it hard to believe the depth of his talent. Meanwhile, Cheryl, her back to the scene, began to walk away, her posture suggesting growing impatience. Elena and the other child watched her depart. Her irritation festered, a thought forming in her mind that Kazuya was far too presumptuous for a mere boy. Her face flushed with a mixture of fury and an unfamiliar heat, her eyes narrowed in a fierce, almost embarrassed glare. Unable to tolerate the overwhelming feelings, she issued a sharp command, demanding that Kazuya be brought to her room immediately so she could lecture him. She thrashed against the attendants, her face contorted in a furious demand for Kazuya to be brought to her. Elena and Mary struggled to restrain her, attempting to calm her escalating rage. Moments later, Kazuya, looking bewildered, was being led by Mary. He questioned why he was being summoned for a lecture, especially after his performance, but Mary simply confirmed that Lady Cheryl had called for him. Upon entering Cheryl's opulent room, she addressed him directly, confirming his identity. He responded with a quiet affirmation, but her tone quickly hardened as she declared he had not listened to his master. Her words seemed to strike him with physical force, for he was now sprawled across the bed, seemingly unconscious or overwhelmed, as Cheryl loomed over him, her expression unreadable from above. As his face contorted in distress, a faint blush rising on his cheeks, her voice cut through the silence, commanding him to serve her. She then moved to straddle him on the bed, her expression one of fierce anger as she questioned why he would be happy being teased by other girls, calling him a fool. Her face drew closer to his, her eyes burning with possessive intensity as she declared Kazuya to be her man. Standing now, she glared, while another girl, who had previously been quite harsh, now offered a gentle smile. Cheryl, still fuming, wondered aloud why the other girl had suddenly changed her demeanor. His gaze shifted, and Kazuya, seemingly resigned or accepting, simply thought that it was fine now. Meanwhile, her hand clenched, and Cheryl realized this was her chance. He then leaned in, pressing his lips against hers in a sudden kiss. Cheryl's eyes widened in shock, a blush spreading across her cheeks as she instinctively brought her hands to her face. As he continued the kiss, Cheryl remained stunned, her mind reeling. In the background, the other girl sat alone on the bed, looking dejected and forgotten. Her face flushed deeply. Cheryl finally managed to utter a flustered, almost breathless, accusation, calling him a fool. She heard the command, a demand to undress, and wondered why she was obeying. Despite her internal conflict, questioning why she would listen to a man, she began to comply, her expression a mix of reluctance and a strange resolve. As he leaned in close, his voice a low murmur, he asked her where she desired his service, causing her to blush and avert her gaze. She turned her head to him, her cheeks deeply flushed, and with a finger to her lips, she softly asked if it was truly over. Sometime later, Cheryl stood by a grand, ornate door, now fully dressed. A voice from beyond the frame called out, addressing her as Cheryl Ojusama, and informed her that it was time to return. The imposing facade of a magnificent, classical building stood under a cloudy sky, its intricate architecture suggesting a place of significant wealth and status. Moments later, Kazuya stood outside the grand building, his expression pensive, as a vintage carriage pulled away, carrying someone with it. Later still, Kazuya and Cheryl were together once more, Cheryl nestled closely against his side, her eyes closed in quiet contentment, a soft smile gracing her lips. Inside a well-appointed room, they sat together, Cheryl still clinging to Kazuya, while a maid sat opposite them, observing their interaction. The maid fixed her gaze upon them, her expression unreadable but serious, as Kazuya seemed to hesitate, perhaps about to speak or react to her silent scrutiny. She regarded Kazuya with a stern, almost disapproving gaze, sensing an unusual tension in the air as he leaned close. He listened as she firmly suggested that he maintain a greater distance from Cheryl, her words carrying an undeniable weight. Despite the maid's warning, Cheryl appeared, her face alight with a playful smile as she called out Kazuya's name, seemingly unconcerned by the situation. He, meanwhile, looked somewhat embarrassed. The maid then turned her attention to Cheryl, calmly stating that the preparations for her punishment were complete. Kazuya reacted with a startled exclamation. Cheryl, however, brushed off the maid's words, insisting she would never do anything so cruel. But the maid was resolute, declaring that Kazuya would not be permitted to stay in Cheryl's room within the grand residence. Kazuya was left stunned. Later, Kazuya found himself alone, sitting dejectedly in a room, the silence of the grand estate echoing around him. He pondered his own capabilities, wondering if his presence was truly having an impact, especially concerning Cheryl. His thoughts were interrupted as Cheryl suddenly appeared, kneeling beside him with her head resting intimately on his lap, asking if his influence was perhaps too potent. She looked up at him, her face flushed with anticipation, and eagerly asked if they could continue their earlier intimate moments. Just as the moment intensified, the maid reappeared, standing in a doorway. She called out Kazuya's name, sternly reminding him not to forget about the ancient documents. Kazuya looked taken aback. Returning from the ball, the carriage approached the grand mansion, its ornate architecture standing majestically against the sky. As the carriage drew closer, a young boy with light hair, Peter, frantically called out Kazuya's name, his arms outstretched in distress. He explained his deep concern for Kazuya, Having heard that he was to receive a punishment, his face etched with worry. Meanwhile, Cheryl, her expression stern and annoyed, seemed to have overheard Peter's anxious words, a small, fearful image of Peter appearing in her thoughts. She arrived on the scene, instructing Peter, who was now on the ground, to rise. She declared that there would be no punishment and commanded him to spread the word to everyone. Peter, taken aback by Cheryl's unexpected leniency, looked up in surprise. She then pointed to a dirty spot and a stray branch, ordering him to clean it immediately and forbidding him dinner as a consequence. Still reeling from the turn of events, Peter turned to Kazuya, questioning why Cheryl would revoke a punishment, finding her actions unusual. He then directly asked Kazuya about his true identity. The maid then approached, her gaze fixed on Kazuya as she wondered aloud what he had done to Cheryl to cause such an unusual change in her behavior. She then asked Kazuya if he had heard Cheryl's instructions. At the mention of punishment, Peter, ever fearful, quickly dashed away. With a flat, knowing expression, the maid then directly questioned Kazuya, asking if he had used his power on Cheryl, leaving him visibly surprised. He stood before the maid, who explained that she had been told to serve him suddenly, despite Cheryl's previous aversion to him. She wondered if her earlier suspicions were correct. The maid continued, stating that Cheryl had been acting strangely, fidgeting, and she suspected it was due to Kazuya. He looked at her, questioning why the sudden change. She then revealed the reason. It was because Cheryl had heard Kazuya play the piano. He reacted with visible shock, repeating the word piano in disbelief. He covered his face with his hand, a wave of realization washing over him. He wondered if this was the power he possessed, a power that others around him seemed to sense. The maid, blushing deeply, then confessed that it wasn't just Cheryl. She too had found herself inexplicably drawn to Kazuya, her heart fluttering whenever he was near. She gently held his hand. She pressed his hand against her chest, her blush deepening as she struggled with her unexpected feelings. She continued, emphasizing that it wasn't only Cheryl, but she herself was affected by his touch, specifically his finger. Kazuya, still reeling from her confession, could only stare in wide-eyed astonishment. Suddenly, Cheryl's voice echoed from the mansion's entrance, calling for the maid. The maid, flustered but ever dutiful, quickly responded, promising to come immediately, and hurried away. Left alone, Kazuya looked down at his hand, a thoughtful expression on his face. He silently wondered if this was truly his power at work. He reflected on the strange events, recalling the maid and Cheryl. He knew he had no intention of making them act that way, yet the evidence suggested his actions had an unforeseen impact. He pondered the unsettling feeling that he was not entirely himself, a strange sensation lingering after the recent events. Standing alone on a balcony, he continued to reflect, questioning if he was simply overthinking the situation. Meanwhile, within the mansion, the rustle of a maid's uniform suggested a new development. Moments later, Cheryl appeared, now dressed in a maid's uniform, eagerly asking if the attire suited her. The maid, surprised by Cheryl's sudden change in appearance, exclaimed her name in disbelief. Cheryl explained that Mary had provided the outfit for her, and the maid, still processing the sight, turned and walked away. As she walked, the maid clutched her chest, a profound sense of unease and a strange, inexplicable feeling swirling within her. Back inside, Kazuya sat on a sofa, observing the maid who knelt beside him, her head bowed in what appeared to be distress. His gaze sharpened, fixed on something unseen, as he murmured about ancient texts. He held a small, intricate key, his attention drawn to an ornate chest, confirming to himself that it remained precisely where he remembered. Seated once more, with the chest now before him, he resolved to finally obtain what lay within. His touch sent a shiver through Cheryl, her eyes fluttering closed as a soft moan escaped her lips. She murmured Kazuya's name, her expression one of pure, uninhibited pleasure, as if she simply had to be satisfied. He continued to tease her, his finger now tracing her tongue. With a blush, she looked down, confirming her desire to continue their intimate encounter. Moments later, his own tongue met a teasing finger, a reciprocal gesture in their escalating play. As the intensity grew, she knelt before him, her body flushed and her breathing heavy. Her maid's skirt was lifted, revealing the delicate lace of her undergarments. Her eyes closed once more. She pleaded for him to continue, to repeat the sensations from before. She then pointed to her lower body, specifically requesting his finger there. Responding to her unspoken desire, she stood, her cheeks flushed, and lifted her skirt further, exposing herself as she questioned if she should make herself feel good. Meanwhile, the maid, having approached the room, paused in the doorway, her eyes widening in shock as she witnessed the intimate scene unfolding between Kazuya and Cheryl. Cheryl, still flustered, murmured Kazuya's name, indicating the location of his touch. The maid's face flushed crimson, her hand rising to cover her mouth in utter embarrassment as she softly uttered, "Young lady." Her face became intensely flushed, eyes wide with a gasp, as a finger, presumably Kazuya's, was shown making intimate contact, eliciting a strong physical reaction from her. As the intimacy deepened, Cheryl leaned into Kazuya on a plush sofa, her voice a soft murmur as she repeated his name, acknowledging the pleasurable sensations she was experiencing. Meanwhile, in a distant, opulent room, the maid sat alone on the floor, her posture slumped, as if the sounds of the escalating intimacy had reached her, causing her deep distress. Her face was etched with concern and a hint of sadness, as she internally questioned how her mistress could be making such sounds. A flashback then transported her back 10 years, to a time when a young Cheryl, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, joyfully discovered a beautiful flower in a garden, calling out to a young maid named Mary to look. The young maid, in turn, admired the flower, remarking on its beauty. The young Cheryl, beaming, offered the flower as a gift to Mary, who accepted it with a grateful smile, thanking her mistress. Back in the present, the maid, still sitting alone, clutched her chest, pondering the confusing, unsettling feelings that now overwhelmed her, despite her deep affection for her mistress. Suddenly, Cheryl's eyes widened in surprise, her gaze shifting past Kazuya to the figure of the maid, Mary, who now stood silently in the room. As Kazuya remained oblivious, Cheryl urgently called out Mary's name, her voice laced with a plea. The maid, however, remained still, her face obscured by her bangs, an unreadable presence. Mary finally spoke, her voice firm as she commanded Kazuya to leave immediately, though her internal thoughts suggested a desire for them to continue. Cheryl looked on, her expression one of utter bewilderment at the maid's unexpected and contradictory words. Moments later, the scene had shifted. Cheryl found herself on the floor, her distress evident, while Mary had moved to sit beside Kazuya on the couch, a subtle tension in the air. The maid then boldly positioned herself on Kazuya's lap, her gaze fixed on him, leaving Cheryl to observe the unfolding situation from the floor, a question forming in her mind. Her confusion deepened into shock as she watched, barely able to utter Kazuya's name. Without warning, Mary leaned in and kissed Kazuya on the cheek, a soft sound accompanying the gesture, leaving him visibly surprised and Cheryl stunned. Still perched on his lap, Mary then made a quiet request, her words hanging in the air, further perplexing Cheryl, who could only stare. A flush spread across Cheryl's face, but a newfound resolve hardened her gaze as she echoed Mary's sentiment, demanding the same attention for herself. Her face burned with embarrassment, yet her eyes held a fierce determination as Kazuya finally registered her actions, his expression shifting to one of utter surprise. A young girl, Cheryl, laughed joyfully as she ran through a field, calling out to her maid, Marie. Marie, dressed in her uniform, followed close behind, urging her young mistress to wait. Their hands, one small and delicate, the other slightly larger, clasped together, symbolizing a bond of trust and affection. Moments later, the two embraced warmly. Cheryl declared that they would always be friends, and Marie, with a gentle smile, readily agreed. Meanwhile, in a lavish room, a male figure named Kazuya sat alone, his posture slumped, a visible aura of distress surrounding. The grand mansion stood under the night sky, its windows glowing softly, a silent witness to the events unfolding within. Later, Kazuya lay in bed, his back to the two women, while Marie and Cheryl rested beside him, the aftermath of their shared night settling over them. The next morning, Kazuya sat up in bed, listening intently as Cheryl spoke. She acknowledged the difficulty of their situation, remarking that they had somehow managed to overcome the challenges. Marie, her gaze fixed on Kazuya, silently affirmed Cheryl's words, suggesting a shared understanding of the complex events that had transpired. Days passed, and a sense of peace seemed to settle over the residence, as if the tumultuous events had receded into memory. Yet, the peace was fleeting. Marie, now clad in her maid uniform, found herself in a distant land, a place identified as Algiers. She stood with her skirt slightly lifted, an expression of apprehension on her face, as a stern-faced woman with dark, flowing hair observed her with an intense gaze. It was revealed that Kazuya, too, was in this far-off place, having become entangled in a troublesome predicament. An ornate, locked chest rests on a draped surface, its intricate carvings hinting at hidden secrets. The accompanying text reveals a quest, seeking Cheryl's ancient document. The narrative shifts to a grim past, showing Cheryl, Kazuya, and Marie standing before a barred cell where another woman is imprisoned. The accompanying text speaks of dire circumstances, mentioning a death sentence and nearly becoming a dog, implying a period of severe hardship and degradation for those involved. The scene transitions again, depicting Kazuya lying in a bed, flanked by two unidentified women. The text suggests a struggle, stating that he somehow overcame them, hinting at personal challenges or perhaps even temptations he had to conquer. After enduring these past trials, Kazuya finally sits, a triumphant smile gracing his face as he holds a small, ancient-looking book. Beside him, a small, open chest reveals other trinkets. He reflects that he finally obtained the ancient document. His triumph quickly turns to frustration as he attempts to read the newly acquired tome. The pages are filled with indecipherable script and arcane illustrations, and he exclaims in exasperation that he cannot read it. Meanwhile, Cheryl stands, her expression a mixture of anger and accusation. She questions if he had noticed after all, her gaze sharp and challenging. She confronts Kazuya directly, demanding to know why he didn't pursue her if he knew she had taken the key. She asserts that it was Kazuya who took the key after all. Cheryl's anger gives way to a fearful expression, her hands pressed to her cheeks as she admits her apprehension, fearing punishment. Kazuya, partially obscured, responds with a simple, questioning tone. Cheryl, now seated across from Kazuya, asks him directly why he desired the ancient document. He reveals his true objective, to discover the location of the Mirror of Dreams. Having heard his goal, Cheryl offers to assist him. She proposes to lend him the book and read it for him, mentioning that Marie had suggested it. Kazuya, relieved, expresses his gratitude. He was focused on the ancient document, but its script remained indecipherable. Cheryl, observing him, seemed to grasp a new understanding. He then asked her if the document contained any writing, to which she replied that it did, but it was not in a language he could understand. He pressed further, asking where the Mirror of Dreams could be found. She hesitated, her gaze falling as she prepared to answer. She explained that the church in the Luslier territory was said to be guarding it. He seemed to recall the name, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. The mention of the church brought to mind a memory of a woman from a previous ball, whom they both considered hateful. She sat elegantly, fanning herself, surrounded by other women. Marie, overhearing their conversation, expressed her concern, noting that if Cheryl was involved, and it concerned the Algier territory, it would indeed be troublesome. Kazuya and Cheryl turned to Marie, asking what she meant by troublesome. She firmly stated that it was absolutely out of the question. Marie elaborated, explaining that the town where the church was located was a place where men were forbidden to enter. He looked surprised, questioning if that meant only women resided there and why such a rule existed. The church, a grand structure with intricate stained glass, was dedicated to the teachings of Saint Danchely. He reacted with utter shock as Marie explained the core tenet of Saint Danchely's teachings. Men were deemed entirely unnecessary in their world. He found the doctrine both extreme and astonishing. Marie confirmed that the church in the town, the Alvarez Church, indeed followed Saint Danchely's religion. Kazuya, still processing the implications, wondered aloud how he could possibly infiltrate the church. Marie quickly interjected, attempting to correct his assumption. She then clarified the strict rules of Algier. Men were forbidden not only from the church, but from the entire town itself. His face fell, utterly defeated by this insurmountable obstacle. Cheryl, observing his despair, gently asked if he truly desired the mirror of dreams so intensely. Marie pondered the dilemma, searching for a way for him to enter the forbidden town. Kazuya, still slumped, seemed willing to try anything. Suddenly, a thought sparked in Marie's mind. With a sudden burst of inspiration, Cheryl suggested a solution. What if he simply cross-dressed? Marie's eyes widened in realization, confirming that was precisely the answer. Kazuya, however, could only stare in stunned disbelief. He vehemently protested, declaring it impossible, but Cheryl insisted that cross-dressing would suit him well. As he continued to object, she reminded him of his ultimate goal, obtaining the Lunavail. Despite his continued protests that he would be immediately discovered, Marie began applying makeup to his face, instructing him to remain still. Cheryl watched the transformation unfold. The task was not without its challenges. His physique, for instance, would be difficult to conceal. However, with careful attention to details like hair color, they believed they could make the disguise convincing. He felt the wig being placed upon his head, Marie's hands deftly securing it. Cheryl observed the transformation, remarking that the initial results were quite unexpected. He looked up, a surprised expression on his face as he processed his new appearance. Marie, covering her mouth in amusement, exclaimed in surprise, while Cheryl, looking slightly embarrassed, quickly tried to backtrack, claiming she had only been joking and that the look was not cute. He gazed at his reflection, a strange unfamiliarity in his own features. He admitted he could barely recognize himself, questioning if that was truly his own face staring back. As he struggled with his identity, Marie and Cheryl watched him, both with thoughtful, almost dreamy expressions. Cheryl mused aloud about the strange feeling the transformation evoked, and Marie, understanding her sentiment, affirmed that she felt it too. With the wig in place, Marie declared it was time for the next step, changing clothes. Cheryl eagerly presented a frilly dress, while he, lying on the bed amidst a pile of garments, internally protested, feeling as though he was being treated like a mere doll. His transformation was complete down to his feet, now encased in sturdy, feminine boots. Marie and Cheryl stared at him, their eyes wide with astonishment. Cheryl gasped that the result was beyond anything she could have imagined, while Marie, equally stunned, declared with certainty that there was absolutely no way he would be discovered. He still felt a lingering disbelief, wondering if this was truly happening. Cheryl, however, was firm, telling him that things were different now. She then informed him that from this day forward, he would have a new name. Cheryl, with a mischievous grin, pointed directly at Kazuya, declaring his new name, Kazuya. The disguised man, startled, could only echo the name in disbelief. She then discussed the logistics of his journey with Marie, wondering who would serve as Peter to transport him to the Algier territory. Marie questioned if Kazuya himself would be Peter, to which he, still reeling from his transformation, exclaimed that he was already Kazuya. And so, Kazuya was sent off, transported by a young boy named Peter in a rickshaw. Their destination was the capital of the Algier territory, a sprawling city known as Irisel. Upon arriving, Kazuya was immediately taken aback, his eyes widening in shock. Standing before him was a striking woman with dark hair, holding a rose, who looked at him with a sudden, questioning recognition. "Oh, you," she began. Her gaze sharpened, a flicker of suspicion crossing her features as she silently wondered about his presence. He had barely stepped into the town, and already Kazuya had encountered the very person he had hoped to avoid the most. The territory of Lunavail, under the dominion of the Algier family, was a place where men were strictly forbidden to enter. Within this forbidden land, a young girl with a mischievous grin declared that from this day forward, his name would be Kazuya. He, now reluctantly dressed in a maid's uniform, internally lamented his fate, realizing he had no choice but to cross-dress and infiltrate the church, though a concrete plan still eluded him. The sheer impossibility of the situation overwhelmed him, his face contorted in a silent scream as the word impossible echoed in his mind. Despite his internal protest that such a disguise would surely be exposed, the young girl cheerfully reassured him that he would be perfectly fine. The grand, imposing structure of their target, perhaps the very church he was meant to infiltrate, loomed in the distance. Moments later, the young girl called out to Marie, the maid, who responded with a respectful address to her mistress. Marie then questioned her mistress, asking why she had taken such a liking to Kazuya. He, still in his maid attire, posed a serious question to the young girl. What would happen if his cross-dressing disguise were to be discovered? Marie, standing nearby, calmly explained that the consequence would simply be execution, a risk she considered far too great. The young girl, however, seemed unperturbed by the gravity of the situation. Marie continued, her expression unwavering, stating that it was a fact there was no other viable method for their objective. She further elaborated, explaining that both her mistress and he were known figures, and if they were to be found, it would immediately raise suspicion. He acknowledged her point, a sense of grim understanding settling upon him. He, disguised as Kazuria, was embraced by Cheryl, who urged him to return safely. Marie's hand reached out, gently touching his head, a silent acknowledgement of his new identity. Moments later, a grand building, likely the forbidden Lunavail, stood before them. A voice called out, "Peter." Peter, a young boy, turned to face the source of the call, where Kazuria and Cheryl stood. He inquired about the new girl, asking who she was. Marie, her expression stern, then instructed Peter to escort the girl, Kazuria, to the Algier territory. Peter, surprised, questioned if he was truly the one meant to do so. Peter, still seemingly unaware of Kazuria's true identity, simply gestured for him to follow, inviting him forward. Kazuria, meanwhile, internally wondered if his disguise was truly holding up, if he hadn't been exposed as Kazuya. As Kazuria walked, he noticed a bag, questioning its purpose, realizing it contained various changes of clothes. Peter, observing him, simply urged him to take it along. Kazuria, now alone with Peter, expressed his disbelief, asking why he had to carry such a bag. Peter, however, simply acknowledged that there were many things to carry. Back with Marie and Cheryl, Cheryl casually remarked that Kazuria was a lady, and there was no need to hide it from Peter. Marie remained silent, observing. Peter, having prepared the rickshaw, confirmed his readiness. Marie then bid Kazuria farewell, urging him to be careful, to which he simply acknowledged. Cheryl, with a mischievous grin, watched them depart. As Peter stood, seemingly ready to depart, Cheryl leaned in close, planting a kiss on his cheek, leaving him wide-eyed and blushing. And so, the journey began, as they were sent off to a station bound for the Algier territory. Upon seeing the grand steam engine, Kazuria's eyes widened with pure delight, exclaiming that this was a real automobile. Cheryl, observing his reaction, wondered if he truly enjoyed such things. As they stood on the bustling platform, Kazuria continued to gaze around with wide-eyed curiosity, prompting Cheryl to ask why he was staring so intently. He simply responded with a hesitant, "Well, because." He then offered a soft smile, explaining that he had never imagined a day would come when he would ride an automobile. Cheryl simply acknowledged his sentiment. The train then began its steady journey, carrying them through the landscape. It was a position he was unaccustomed to, and he knew there were thoughts he could not yet comprehend. As the train moved, he mused about the efficiency of an automatically moving vehicle, considering how it would reduce the burden on men. Cheryl, listening, thought to herself that Kazuya certainly considered interesting things. Cheryl then shifted the conversation, asking Kazuya why he was wearing such an outfit. He calmly replied that it was necessary for entering the city within Algier territory. He suddenly leaned forward, his expression serious, emphasizing the danger. He warned that if he were discovered, the consequences would be dire, asking if she understood. She affirmed that she did. Despite his warning, Cheryl, her brow furrowed with concern, questioned if it was too late to turn back now. He simply looked at her, his resolve unwavering. They finally arrived in the city of Algier territory, and Kazuya, still disguised, wondered if his cover might not be blown so easily. However, trouble quickly found them, as a menacing trident suddenly appeared, thrusting towards them. He witnessed the young girl, Cheryl, wielding a trident with surprising force, striking down Peter, the rickshaw puller, who lay helpless on the ground. She declared with a fierce grin that even if their countries differed, men were inherently weak and foolish creatures. Meanwhile, Kazuya, still in his disguise, and Marie observed the scene, with Marie remarking that this country seemed to be like this everywhere. Cheryl, still holding the trident, then commanded Peter to move aside. She then turned, extending a welcoming hand to Kazuya and Marie, proclaiming, "Welcome to Irezal, the city of Algier territory." Kazuya, internally, could only lament the extreme gender disparity evident in this place. Peter, still cowering, thanked Cheryl for the ride, but she sharply retorted, ordering him to leave immediately now that the welcome was over. Kazuya, disguised as Kazuria, could only think to himself, "Oh dear, what a situation this has become." The city of Irezal unfolded before them, a sprawling landscape of buildings, though Kazuya mused that despite its grandeur, the men here were likely treated as less than human. As they walked through the bustling streets, Kazuya, still in his maid disguise, noticed the prominent figures of women, their forms accentuated by their attire, while men were conspicuously absent from the public eye. He remarked to Marie that there were truly no men to be seen anywhere, and if this was the case, he feared he would be immediately exposed. Marie, in response, suggested that perhaps it would be better if he simply remained as he was, but Kazuya, his eye wide with panic, apologized, realizing he absolutely could not allow his disguise to be discovered. A captivating woman, adorned in a revealing dark dress and a choker, smiled brightly, holding a staff decorated with roses. She seemed to be addressing someone, offering a polite, "No, the pleasure is all mine." He found himself approached by Cheryl, who, with Marie beside her, inquired if he was all right and if he had sustained any injuries. Kazuya, still processing the stark reality of this new territory, looked at her with a surprised expression, wondering who this person was and where he had seen her before. As his thoughts raced, Kanzuya's gaze fell upon the same captivating woman from earlier, now holding a flute-like instrument, surrounded by other women who laughed and conversed. A sudden, shocking realization dawned on him, connecting her to a past event. He remembered the rickshaw puller, Peter, who had been subjected to Cheryl's harsh treatment, and a wave of panic washed over him as he understood the implications. A steam train chugged through the mountainous landscape, carrying its passengers from Algiers towards Luziri, all in search of Lunavail. Upon arriving, the city proved to be exactly as rumored, a place exclusively for women, where men were forbidden. As she navigated the bustling streets, a moment of inattention led her to collide with another woman, who immediately offered an apology. The elegant woman, Lara Ruziri, the esteemed lord of Luziri, gracefully acknowledged the encounter, stating that the fault was hers as well. A sudden realization struck the young traveler. This was the same annoying person from her past. Lara, seeing the young woman on the ground, inquired if she was hurt. The young woman, still a bit dazed, apologized, explaining she was simply unaccustomed to the city's sights. Lara then asked where she had come from, to which the young woman hesitantly replied, mentioning Algiers. The mere mention of Algiers caused Lara's expression to sour, her brow furrowing in clear displeasure. Lara, fanning herself delicately, commented on the young woman's face, recalling a past encounter with someone named Cheryl and a piano man. The young woman's heart pounded as she realized her disguise had been seen through. Lara knew she was the piano man. With a warm smile, Lara declared the young woman to be very beautiful, leaving her flustered and blushing. The young traveler, still reeling from the unexpected recognition, was further taken aback as Lara Ruziri, with a confident smile, offered to personally guide her through the city, assuming she would find it to her liking. Lara, beaming with pride, declared that Luziri was far more wonderful than Algiers, a city she seemed to hold in low regard. The young traveler, observing this, noted Lara's surprisingly strong competitive spirit. As the two women began their stroll through the bustling streets of Luziri, the young traveler felt a momentary relief that her true identity had not been immediately exposed. Yet, a lingering unease persisted. Lara paused, turning to look back at her companion, her mind drifting to a past encounter. She mused on how different her current elegant demeanor was from her mood during the incident involving the piano. Then, a sudden thought struck her. She then realized she had forgotten to ask her companion's name, and promptly inquired. Lara Ruziri then introduced herself, stating her full name. In response, the young traveler introduced herself as Kazaria. Lara, however, seemed surprised by Kazaria's lack of reaction, asking if she wasn't astonished to hear her name. A chilling realization dawned upon the young traveler. Lara, the city's lord, had known her identity all along and had been actively searching for her. Lara leaned closer, a coy expression on her face, and remarked that her name was quite famous. The young traveler could only stare back in stunned silence. Lara gracefully fanned herself, internally pleased that her reputation extended even to Algiers. The young traveler remained speechless, her mind racing to comprehend the situation. With a flourish of her fan, Lara declared that her overwhelming beauty was the cause of her widespread fame. The young traveler, observing this display, could only conclude that Lara possessed an exceedingly high opinion of herself. She pondered the nature of Luziri, the city she had been told about, a place shrouded in mystery and strict rules. As she walked through its bustling streets with Lara, it became undeniably clear there were no men at all. It was, as described, a city exclusively for women. Lara Ruziri, with her striking attire, moved with an air of confident allure. Perhaps due to the warm climate, many of the women they passed wore revealing clothing, a sight that added to the city's unique atmosphere. Suddenly, Lara turned to her, her gaze piercing, and uttered her true name, Kazaria? The young traveler's eyes widened in shock, her carefully constructed disguise feeling increasingly fragile. Lara, observing her reaction, chuckled softly. She dismissed the idea that she was merely looking at other girls, then added playfully that there was no need to hide anything. As they continued through the city's intricate architecture, Lara leaned in, promising to tell her something important, leaving her to wonder what revelation was coming next. In a secluded alley, Lara posed a provocative question, asking if someone from Algiers like her would truly understand the meaning of love. She watched Luna's surprised expression with a knowing smile. Without warning, Lara closed the distance, pressing her lips against Luna's in a sudden, intimate kiss. Luna's eyes flew open in utter astonishment. As Lara pulled away, her gaze dropped, lingering on Luna's chest. A new realization dawned on her face as she murmured, "Oh, Kazaria." She felt Lara's gaze linger, the woman's voice a low murmur as she complimented Luna's physique, her words laced with an unsettling intimacy. Overwhelmed, she pleaded with Lara Ruziri to cease her advances, a desperate plea escaping her lips as she tried to maintain some semblance of composure. As she fled, a frantic thought consumed her. If her disguise as a man were to be completely stripped away, the consequences in this women-only city would be dire. The narrow, winding streets of Luziri offered little solace, the ancient stone walls echoing her silent panic. She knew she could not afford to be seen in such a vulnerable state, especially not in a place where any passerby might witness her distress and the truth of her identity. The moment one stepped into the city, they would inevitably encounter Lara Ruziri, the esteemed lord of Luziri. She greeted visitors with a captivating smile, her fan held gracefully. She had taken a liking to him for some reason, guiding him through the city streets. As they walked, a cloaked figure watched from a distance, prompting him to exclaim in surprise. Suddenly, Lara pulled him into a protective embrace, calling out his alias, Kazaria. Her gaze softened as she inquired if he would call her simply Lara. Still held tightly, he blushed deeply, realizing that if this intimate proximity continued, his true identity as a man would soon be exposed. Their embrace was interrupted by the arrival of a young attendant, who announced that it was about time. Meanwhile, the cloaked figure continued to observe Lara from a hidden vantage point. Lara looked surprised by the interruption, while he, still bewildered, wondered aloud who the newcomer was. The young girl stood defiantly, hands on her hips, declaring herself to be Lara's personal attendant. This was Camille Arden, a dedicated attendant of the Rosary family. Camille informed Lara that the worship service was about to commence and urged them to hasten. He, in turn, felt a wave of relief wash over him. Luna's moment of vulnerability was abruptly interrupted as Camille Arden regarded her with a look of clear annoyance. She flinched, startled by the intensity of Camille's stare. Camille then directly questioned her, asking for her name. Luna, still on edge, hesitantly replied that she was Kazaria. Camille's expression tightened, finding the name strange. The attendant's gaze lingered, a suspicion forming in her mind as she wondered if Luna could possibly be a man. She felt a strange hostility emanating from the newcomer. Camille, leaning in close to Lara, declared herself to be Lara's favorite, implying a possessiveness over the Lord of Luziri. Lara, however, gently chided Camille, reminding her that they should all get along. Luna watched the exchange, feeling a growing unease. As the group moved through the picturesque town, an internal thought surfaced, questioning if Camille harbored feelings for Lara. The thought urged caution, suggesting they should separate before becoming entangled in further trouble. Luna, taking the cue, announced her departure, thanking them for their hospitality. Camille, however, seemed reluctant to see her go, calling out her name with a hint of protest. She paused, turning back to express her regret that she couldn't guide them to the church as she had hoped. Lara then informed her that the church was located within the Rosary territory. Luna's eyes widened in surprise at this revelation. She smiled brightly, expressing a strong desire to visit the church, her enthusiasm evident. Camille and Lara observed her, a slight smile on Lara's face. As Luna stood nearby, Camille Arden found herself questioned by Lara, who asked what she was doing. Camille, startled, acknowledged the question with a simple, "Oh, that's right." As a bead of sweat rolled down her face, Lara then smiled, holding her fan, and proposed that Camille should teach Kazaria about love. He, in turn, questioned what love truly was, recalling that the word had been mentioned earlier. Camille, utterly shocked, exclaimed in disbelief, asking if she was truly expected to teach this guy. Lara, meanwhile, drifted into a dreamy thought, musing that it was a wonderful feeling, one she hadn't understood before. She wondered if such a thing as love could truly exist within Rosary. Suddenly, she was seen intimately embracing Luna, who was now nude, inviting her closer with a soft "come here." Luna, in turn, responded with a shy "oh, sister." In the background, Camille and the mysterious figure were seen running, suggesting they were witnessing or reacting to this private moment. Later, as they stood together, Camille voiced her displeasure, stating that such a situation was truly unpleasant. Inside the grand church, Lara reiterated her offer to Camille, urging her to teach Kazaria about love. Luna, standing beside them, simply looked on. He looked down, a blush creeping across his face, seemingly flustered by the ongoing conversation and Lara's persistent intentions. He then quietly mused about Lara's actions, wondering what she was truly up to. Ignoring Camille's obvious frustration, Lara simply smiled, remarking that Camille didn't seem to understand at all. She then wondered aloud if she should teach Kazaria about love herself. She, still holding her elegant fan, smiled knowingly at Luna, offering to grant any wish Camille might have, no matter how trivial. Luna, wide-eyed and shocked, could only stammer in disbelief, questioning the extent of the offer. Meanwhile, Camille, observing the interaction from a distance, seethed with frustration, recognizing Lara's manipulative intent. She muttered that Lara was truly going to do something drastic. Luna, still reeling from Lara's words, internally lamented that she had come to the church not to be explored, but now feared she would be stripped of her clothes against her will. She continued to ponder the situation, wondering if it was acceptable to refuse. If she were to refuse, she realized, it would be like a woman's hell. As Luna stood, Camille's voice cut through the air, instructing her to use this room. Luna, startled, responded with a hesitant query. Camille then forcefully shoved Luna into the room, urging her to hurry inside. Luna stumbled forward, caught off guard by the sudden push. Inside, Lara, still smiling, mused that after this, Luna would surely convert to the Dantry religion. She then glanced at Luna, who looked away, thinking that Lara seemed to bear no ill will, which was a shame. Moments later, Camille was seen pinning Luna down on a bed, her actions swift and decisive. Camille leaned in close, her expression intense, declaring that resistance was futile. She intended to teach Luna about love herself. Camille, with a determined expression, declared that resistance was futile. She intended to instill love for Lady Lara within her. Meanwhile, Luna lay in bed, her thoughts troubled. She murmured Camille's name, a hint of distress in her voice. Camille then sat beside her on the bed, directly asking if she harbored feelings for Lara. Luna's eyes widened in surprise at the unexpected question. Camille, flustered and blushing, quickly denied the implication, insisting she was merely a servant. She then internally noted how transparent Luna's reactions were. Luna, still processing the exchange, thought that if Camille truly felt that way, she should cease her actions. She believed Camille hated this situation and resolved to find a way to convince her and escape. Camille, however, responded with fierce resolve, her expression hardening. She declared that her actions were Lady Lara's command, and her loyalty was absolute. She then leaned over Luna, her hand reaching out. Camille explained that her role was to teach Luna about love and to convey the wonders of the Danchery religion. Luna looked on, startled. Luna, observing Camille, mused internally about Camille's small chest, wondering if Lady Lara would find it appealing. Her thoughts were then interrupted by a sudden realization, causing her to exclaim in surprise. Camille, smiling broadly, seemed to interpret Luna's reaction, remarking that such tastes were interesting. She then suggested that if Luna felt that way, Camille herself could. Luna's expression twisted into one of shock and outrage, her body recoiling as she shouted, demanding to know why Camille was angry, even as Camille remained close, her hands seemingly still on Luna. She found herself pinned to the floor, Camille pressing down on her. Luna, bewildered and angered by the situation, questioned Camille's sense of values, wondering aloud if being smaller wasn't preferable. Camille continued to touch her. Despite her protests, Camille leaned in, her expression firm, and told Luna not to resist. Luna could only manage a pained grunt in response. She continued to struggle, internally declaring the situation dire and asserting that she could not be further corrupted, even if the method was somewhat forceful. Suddenly, with an unexpected surge of strength, Luna reversed their positions, pinning Camille beneath her. Camille looked up, startled. Her hand moved to Camille's uniform, and she realized she had no choice but to use force. A strange sense of unease washed over her as she considered her next move. As Luna began to act, Camille cried out, demanding that she not remove her clothes. Luna, however, remained resolute, thinking that Camille had been the one to initiate such actions first. Moments later, Camille lay exposed on the floor, her uniform top removed to reveal bandages wrapped tightly around her chest. She looked utterly shocked and mortified. Her legs remained clad in her shorts and knee pads, a stark contrast to her exposed upper body. Luna, observing the bandages, realized they were a seressure, a traditional chest wrap. A new question formed in her mind. Why would Camille be wearing something like that? Mortified, Camille curled into a ball, covering her face and pleading with Luna not to look at her. She wore a seressure, Luna realized, her eyes widening in surprise. Was she binding her chest to appear smaller, perhaps to gain favor with Lara? As Luna processed this, Camille looked up, pleading with her not to tell anyone. Luna quickly reassured her, and Camille confessed her fear of being disliked by Lady Lara. Luna looked down, a conflicted expression on her face. She thought Camille was a good, healthy child, but a deeper, unsettling feeling lingered. Luna then pressed Camille down onto the bed, declaring that she, too, was a man and could not afford to be exposed. Camille, startled, cried out for her to stop. The sensations intensified, causing Camille to writhe and moan softly, her eyes wide and dazed. She questioned why she was reacting in such a way. Still pinned beneath Luna, Camille, now thoroughly flustered, demanded to know what had just happened and repeatedly told Luna to stop. A close-up revealed Camille's face, still flushed and bewildered, as she wondered about the strange tingling sensation that now ran across her skin. Ignoring Camille's protests, Luna reached out, her fingers moving towards the cap on Camille's head, intent on removing. Just as the overwhelming sensations began to subside, a sudden weight pressed down upon her. She opened her eyes to find Luna, whom she knew as Kazaria, pinning her to the bed, her own expression one of surprise. Camille, startled, called out her alias. Luna then sat up, her gaze intense as she looked at the still confused Camille. She declared that Camille was next, her words carrying an unsettling weight. Without hesitation, Luna reached down and began to pull Camille's uniform shorts further down, exposing her bare bottom. Camille's eyes widened in shock and disbelief, questioning if it was truly Luna or Kazaria doing this. Luna, now smiling, pointed at Camille and cheerfully called her name, while Camille remained in a state of distress, still processing the sudden turn of events. A wave of regret washed over Camille. She chastised herself, realizing she had been careless, mistakenly believing the ordeal was over. As they both sat on the bed, Camille knelt before Luna, her hands clasped together in a desperate plea. She begged Luna to keep what had just transpired a secret. She clutched her hand, a faint glow emanating from it, her expression one of deep distress. She wondered if she was truly all right after using such power, and if this meant it was happening again. Still covering herself, she looked at Luna with a blush, asking if this was to be a secret. Luna, with a surprised look, clarified that it was far more than just a secret. Still on the bed, she hugged herself tightly, her face flushed with shame. She thought about her body being touched by a man, and the defilement that would be known if anyone found out. Her eyes were closed, a single tear escaping, as she grappled with the terrifying uncertainty of what might be done to her next. She covered her face with her hands, crying out that she had been made to feel good, and if Lady Lara were to find out, everything would be exposed. Luna watched her, a quiet thought forming that this raw vulnerability was Camille's true nature. Blushing, she looked up at Luna, who then offered to keep the secret of Kazaria, if Camille, in turn, kept Luna's secret from Lady Lara. Luna then smiled, a sense of relief washing over her as she realized that everything had somehow settled, attributing the success to the power of her finger. Meanwhile, across the land, a grand city stood under a vast sky. It was said that just like Mary, Camille's power must have activated, and she would surely manage to get by in this country. Within the hallowed halls of a magnificent cathedral, a figure reported to the Holy Maiden that a man had wandered into the city. The Holy Maiden responded with a thoughtful, "Is that so?" The Holy Maiden, Celestiarike, a young girl with a gentle smile, then issued a chilling command, "Punish him," she declared, her voice carrying an unsettling conviction that their religious order would destroy all men. Yet, despite such a chilling decree, the ultimate goal, she insisted, was to fill the world with true love. The narrative would continue, exploring the Holy Maiden's duty. He continued, asking if she knew anything about it. She replied that she had not heard of such a thing. Suddenly, a thought struck her. She mentioned hearing about something at the church and asked if Lara knew anything about it, though she doubted it. He questioned what she meant by Holy Emperor as the scene shifted to the grand, empty interior of a church. She looked at him with wide, surprised eyes, exclaiming that he couldn't possibly be unaware of Danchali, the church's foremost goddess-like figure. He then suggested they ask this Danchali for information, but Lara immediately forbade it, warning that if a man were to approach her. Her warning was punctuated by a distant, massive explosion, turning a figure into ash. Lara and the protagonist reacted with shock, calling the act foolish. He acknowledged the rumor, but Lara clarified that it was more than just a rumor. It was a fact that men were not accepted, and it was better not to approach. He pondered his predicament, questioning the identity of the Holy Emperor and lamenting his lack of any real leads. He wondered what kind of person Kami was supposed to be, the persona he had adopted. He realized that as a man, he knew nothing of Kazuria, or rather, he was not truly of this world. As he pondered, Lara called out, asking him to come closer. She began to explain, "Our Holy Emperor is." She then adopted a serious, determined expression, ready to impart crucial information. She pointed to a grand portrait of the Holy Emperor, describing her as a being of divine beauty and purity, revered as a reborn goddess. Then, gesturing to a smaller image depicting a man consumed by flames, she revealed the grim truth. Men who dared to approach the Holy Emperor were incinerated. He stared in shock, the reality of the danger sinking in. Emphasizing the gravity of the situation, she warned him directly that this was a well-known legend, and since he knew nothing of Kazuria, he absolutely must not approach the Holy Emperor. He acknowledged her warning, understanding the peril. Lara then instructed him to wait in his room while she went to report to Lady Lara. Back in his room, he stood thoughtfully for a moment before a faint sound caught his attention, drawing his gaze towards the window. He opened the window, leaning out slightly, and identified the source of the sound as music. He looked out at a grand, ornate building, its domes and arches suggesting a place of significant importance, the likely origin of the melodic notes. He stood before the grand building, the source of the mysterious sound, a small exclamation mark appearing above him as he processed the discovery. He listened intently, confirming his suspicion. It was indeed the sound of a piano. As he continued to listen, a look of exasperation crossed his face. The playing was utterly dreadful, he thought, lamenting the clumsy fingering. Inside, a young girl with braided hair, dressed in a maid's uniform, sat at the piano, tears streaming down her face as she mumbled apologies. An older woman, stern and bespectacled in a nun's habit, loomed over the girl, harshly declaring that even a dog could play the instrument better. The maid flinched, finding the words cruel. Peering through a window, he observed the scene, a flicker of recognition in his eyes as he watched the maid being scolded by the nun while attempting to play the piano. His gaze then fell upon a portrait hanging on the wall, depicting a regal young woman. A sudden, shocking realization dawned on him. The girl in the portrait was the Holy Emperor. Meanwhile, the nun continued her strict instruction, ordering the maid to remember the lesson by next week. The maid, still tearful, looked up with a confused expression, wondering about something. She glanced around the opulent room, her eyes scanning the surroundings as if searching for something or someone, while he remained hidden behind a pillar, observing her. His eyes widened in surprise, a gasp escaping him, as the maid's gaze seemed to meet his, a subtle look of recognition or surprise on her own face. After the Holy Emperor's gaze seemed to fall upon him, Kami, still in her maid disguise, felt a surge of panic. She internally worried that she might have touched the Holy Emperor's reverse scale, a forbidden act. A voice then called out, instructing her to come closer, to which she meekly responded, "Yes." Moments later, Kami found herself in a lavish room with the Holy Emperor, who sat composed on a sofa. The Holy Emperor inquired about her piano performance, while Kami, standing respectfully, internally acknowledged the danger of her proximity, recalling the warnings about men being incinerated if they approached the divine ruler. A glass of water sat nearby, reflecting the quiet tension. Despite the underlying tension, Kami offered a forced smile, praising the Holy Emperor's piano skills as very skillful. The Holy Emperor, however, seemed unconvinced, her expression questioning the sincerity of the compliment. The Holy Emperor then countered, stating that Kami's performance was, frankly, subtle, a remark that visibly surprised Kami, who held a glass of water in her hand. A faint smile touched the Holy Emperor's lips as she noted how everyone else merely offered her praise, suggesting Kami's candidness was a rarity. Kami, still clutching the glass, realized the Holy Emperor perceived her as an honest person. Feeling a shift in the atmosphere, Kami relaxed slightly and expressed empathy for the Holy Emperor's struggles with the piano, admitting she understood the frustration of uncooperative fingers. She pondered aloud what could be done, eliciting a surprised glance from the Holy Emperor. With a genuine smile, she then revealed her own experience, admitting that she too played the piano but found herself clumsy and unable to play skillfully. The Holy Emperor's expression brightened with delight at this revelation, exclaiming it was a coincidence that Cammy also played. She then extended an invitation, suggesting Cammy play a little if she had the time, leaving Cammy momentarily stunned. As Cammy held the glass, a strategic thought formed in her mind. If she could foster a friendly relationship with the Holy Emperor in this setting, she might be able to learn about Lunavail. She also considered if there were deeper implications to this unexpected turn of events. Before Cammy could fully process her thoughts, the Holy Emperor, now standing, took her hand and began to pull her along, excitedly declaring that she had heard Kinzuya's piano. Cammy, taken aback, could only utter a questioning piano. As the Holy Emperor led her, Cammy considered the situation. If her piano possessed the power to captivate people, then it was acceptable to let the Holy Emperor hear it now. Moments later, they stood before a grand piano. The Holy Emperor remarked that the piece was indeed difficult. The nun tutor, standing nearby with the small creature, then began to speak, excusing herself. Before the nun tutor could finish, Cammy's fingers, swift and precise, descended upon the keys. The Holy Emperor's eyes widened in astonishment, her expression one of profound surprise as the first notes resonated through the room. She stood captivated, her hands clasped to her chest, utterly absorbed by the melody that filled the air. The music seemed to transcend the very walls of the grand building, promising an effect yet to be fully revealed. In the grand hall, Cammy stood before a magnificent piano, contemplating its profound ability to draw people in, wondering if her own playing possessed such a power. Moments later, she and the Holy Emperor peered cautiously from behind a partition, observing the instrument with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Then, a pair of hands, poised with delicate precision, began to play the keys, the music intended solely for the Holy Emperor's ears. The Holy Emperor's eyes widened in astonishment, her mouth agape, as Cammy, now seated at the piano, played with an intense, focused energy that seemed to radiate from her very being. She played with profound concentration, her eyes closed, as if channeling the very essence of the music. Around her, the Holy Emperor, Lara, Creature_1, and a silent butler watched, seemingly captivated. Cammy thought that if the music truly held such an effect, it should surely work the same way for Cheryl. She continued to play the grand piano in the ornate hall, a silent plea echoing in her mind for the music to take hold. Her fingers danced across the keys with incredible speed and precision, her expression a mask of deep, unwavering concentration. The powerful melody seemed to resonate through the very foundations of the building. After the performance concluded, she looked up at the Holy Emperor, who stood beside the piano, asking if that was the correct way to play the piece. Her hands rested gently on the sheet music as she acknowledged the difficulty of the composition, but suggested learning it slowly, allowing her fingers to gradually memorize the intricate movements. The Holy Emperor listened intently to her explanation, as Cammy assured her that with repeated practice, she would undoubtedly master the piece. She watched the Holy Emperor, who seemed unimpressed, even annoyed, by her performance. The Holy Emperor wondered aloud if the music was truly having no effect, while Lara, observing from the side, also questioned if the desired outcome was failing to materialize. A pang of doubt struck her. She wondered if her piano playing truly lacked power, and if Marie's guidance had been a mistake after all. Suddenly, a maid burst into the room, calling out to the Holy Emperor, Celeste. Both Cammy and Lara turned, startled, as the maid announced she had a report. The Holy Emperor, surprised, asked what had happened. The maid, revealed to be the nun tutor, reported that an intruder, suspected of stealing food, had previously invaded the territory and had now been discovered and apprehended. The Holy Emperor smiled, commending the nun tutor for her good work, and then inquired about the intruder's origin, asking from which territory the man hailed. Cammy reacted internally with a soft gasp as the nun tutor stated the intruder was believed to be a vagrant. The nun tutor then instructed the Holy Emperor to continue with her piano practice, as usual. The Holy Emperor, already seated at the instrument, questioned if she should truly proceed, as usual. With a wide, unsettling smile, the Holy Emperor suggested that the intruder should be subjected to burning treatment. She then explained her reasoning, stating that strange diseases were prevalent, making such measures a serious necessity. Cammy reacted with a shocked realization. As the nun tutor stood over her, the Holy Emperor, still at the piano, declared that all men should simply perish. She elaborated on her chilling belief, stating that men were the root of all problems, and if they were gone from the world, the country would be prosperous, peace would reign, and the people could live in tranquility. She continued, her voice laced with a question, asking if others shared her grim perspective. Her expression shifted to one of profound shock, her eyes wide with disbelief as the grand piano stood silently beside her. She could only utter a hesitant sound of inquiry. The Holy Emperor, however, beamed with a bright, innocent smile, declaring with absolute certainty that men were indeed utterly useless creatures. This declaration caused a surge of anger within her, her brow furrowing as she internally scoffed at the very notion of male pride. The Holy Emperor then turned to her, stating her intention to quickly acquire the Lunavail and depart from this place. She then posed a question, asking why Cammy was there. She elaborated, inquiring if Cammy knew about the Lunavail, describing it as seemingly a mirror of dreams. Cammy's eyes widened in recognition and excitement. She knew of the Lunavail and eagerly asked if the Holy Emperor was referring to that specific item. The Holy Emperor, in turn, pondered if it was indeed the object she sought. The Holy Emperor then suggested that if Cammy possessed it, she would be grateful to see it. Cammy, understanding the implication, simply acknowledged her words. With a confident stance and crossed arms, the Holy Emperor proposed an exchange. In return for seeing the Lunavail, Cammy should teach her how to play the piano. Her unexpected offer left Cammy utterly stunned, prompting the Holy Emperor to question her reaction, wondering why she seemed so surprised. Still reeling from the Holy Emperor's unexpected request, he could only manage a hesitant, "Is that all right?" The Holy Emperor, however, beamed with delight, confirming, "Of course." As the conversation continued, the Holy Emperor, now seated before a grand piano, inquired about his name. He responded, revealing, "Ah, I am Kazuria." In turn, she introduced herself, stating, "My name is Seals. It's a pleasure to meet you." He acknowledged her, understanding the new dynamic. The weight of the situation settled upon him, a wave of fear washing over his face. He questioned internally if he could truly teach piano, while Lara and the small creature observed the exchange with a mix of surprise and concern. Later, Seals found herself alone, walking through the palace halls. A sense of relief washed over her, a quiet satisfaction at finally being by herself. The sensation intensified, causing her to arch her back as she lay on a bed, her mind consumed by the desire for touch, a silent plea for someone to be there. Her face was flushed, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she murmured, finding the feeling both overwhelming and pleasurable, her thoughts fixated on Kazuria. The grand Danchali church stood majestically under the sky, its imposing architecture a familiar sight. Far from the intimate encounter, outside the Danchali church, a voice called out, demanding to know where Kazuria had gone, before beginning to explain the situation. Kazuria, her face contorted in disbelief and frustration, demanded to know if she was truly expected to teach Seals the piano, questioning if she herself even possessed the ability to play. Seals, looking downcast in her maid uniform, stood before Kazuria, who maintained a stern expression. Lara, also in a maid uniform, stood nearby as Kazuria pressed for an explanation, asking what chain of events had led to this peculiar predicament. Seals, with a hesitant began to speak. Seals, her gaze now firm upon Kazuria, declared that if she played the Lunavail, she would reveal it. Lara, standing protectively beside Seals, interjected, reminding them that she had already issued a warning. The small creature_1, observed the exchange from nearby. Kazuria, her expression pensive, considered Seals's words regarding the piano. Lara, standing beside Seals and creature_1, offered a suggestion, believing it must be connected to a festival, perhaps the one preceding it. Kazuria then echoed, "A festival?" Kazuria, turning her head slightly with a knowing smirk, elaborated that it was the festival where the Danchali church took the lead, offering prayers and gratitude to the goddess for a bountiful harvest. The grand hall of the Danchali church was bustling with activity, filled with numerous people gathered for the solemn prayer festival. Kazuria, her expression now serious and deeply focused, brought a finger to her chin, lost in thought. Seals, standing upon a bed, explained that this year, the Holy Emperor Seals herself would undertake a major role. Lara, standing below, affirmed that Seals had indeed been entrusted with a significant part. Kazuria, looking up at them, then inquired about the date of this festival. Seals, now visibly distressed and tearful, confessed that she had only 1 month to master the piano. Kazuria, her eyes wide with shock, again brought a finger to her chin, questioning if such a feat was truly possible for her. Seals, sitting dejectedly on the bed, remained silent. Kazuria, her face hardening with resolve, clenched her fist. She understood then that this was her only path to returning to her original world. Under the cloak of night, the Grand Luziri house stood, its intricate architecture silhouetted against the dark sky. This was Lara's mansion, a place of temporary refuge. Inside the mansion, she found herself in a library, as Lara, bowing slightly, expressed her apologies for the unexpected overnight stay. Kazuria, however, assured her that it was she who had caused the delay. Lara, undeterred, offered for them to stay as long as they wished, stating she would search for lodging the following day. Seals, however, looked on with a hint of concern, asking what was wrong. She stammered, her face flushing slightly, unable to articulate her true feelings. Seals, observing the interaction, voiced her worry that someone might try to take Kazuria away, but she quickly denied it, shaking her head. Internally, she mused that Lara likely disliked her because she was a man, a secret she desperately tried to keep. Lara, still smiling, then offered the use of the bath, inviting Kazuria to use it freely later. Seals, hearing this, looked towards her with a thoughtful expression. A wave of panic washed over her, her eyes widening in alarm. She realized the immense risk of being exposed if she were to undress for a bath. The thought of someone discovering her true identity was overwhelming. Despite the danger, the desire for a bath was almost unbearable, leaving her in a state of frustrated internal conflict. She remembered a time when she was just a boy, being doused with water from a well by another child. Even then, she had been forced to wear a wig for a long journey, a disguise she had maintained for what felt like an eternity. Her thoughts were consumed by the constant burden of her current disguise, the wig she had to wear without fail. As she wrestled with these internal anxieties, Seals, the Holy Emperor, approached, offering to help her wash up. Seals then innocently suggested they bathe together, a proposition that sent a jolt of panic through Kazuria. They then moved to a lavish, spacious bathroom, where a grand bath awaited. Kazuria stared at the inviting water, her internal conflict intensifying. Still, Seals pressed, asking why Kazuria seemed so hesitant. Kazuria, desperate to avoid exposure, internally considered asking Seals to stand guard. Before she could voice the thought, Seals, with an innocent smile, offered to do just that. His mind raced, a deep blush spreading across his face. He wondered if Seals was deliberately trying to make him melt with such an offer. Then, a sudden, shocking realization dawned upon him as he looked at Seals's chest. The Holy Emperor, Seals, was a man. Seals embraced Cammy tightly, expressing her concern that Cammy might become drowsy again, just as she had before. A deep blush spread across Cammy's face as she heard Seals's words, a faucet dripping nearby. She internally grappled with the impropriety of the situation, thinking of herself as an unrighteous man for maintaining the deception. Suddenly, a sharp sound startled her, causing her to flinch and question what it was, urging herself to calm down. Seals, observing Cammy's unease, stated matter-of-factly that the room was locked, suggesting Cammy check for herself if she was truly worried. With a decisive tone, Seals declared that this was the situation and instructed Cammy to take a bath slowly, then quickly added that Cammy should wash her hair first. The implication of Seals's words struck Cammy with a jolt of shock, her eyes widening in realization as she began to remove her disguise. Moments later, Cammy, now revealed to be a young man with short dark hair, smiled broadly, having removed the wig. Seals, witnessing the transformation, stared in utter surprise. He bent over, stretching, and remarked that the disguise had been a bit tough to maintain. Seals continued to observe him, still processing the revelation. Seals, her face flushed with a deep blush, covered her mouth with her hand, her mind reeling with the realization that he was a man, and questioning the confusing feelings stirring within her. Kazuria confirmed that his hair had indeed been a wig, and Seals acknowledged this. He then added that his body was also that of a man, to which Seals simply agreed, the truth now undeniable. She was still reeling from the revelation, her face flushed and eyes wide with shock and confusion. He, now revealed as male, walked away, wrapped in a towel, leaving her to grapple with the truth. Meanwhile, in another part of the grand estate, Lara stood, her expression serene, as the small creature peeked from behind her. She spoke of her admiration for a certain Lara-sama, a significant figure in her life. Back with Seals, she remained deeply flustered, her gaze falling to her own chest as the name, Kazuria, echoed in her mind, a stark reminder of the male body she had just witnessed. He continued to walk away, leaving Seals to call out, a desperate wait, escaping her lips as she reached out, trying to halt his departure. Despite her initial shock, Seals found herself in the bath with Kazuria, embracing him from behind. She offered to wash his back, a gesture of care amidst the bewildering circumstances. As she began to wash him, Seals's face flushed anew, overwhelmed by the reality of his male form. The washcloth in her hand, the foamy water in the bucket, all became part of this unprecedented experience. She continued to observe his body, and Kazuria, sensing her intense scrutiny, asked if it was truly so unusual. Seals internally acknowledged that there were no other men in this town, making his presence a unique and perplexing anomaly. Still processing the profound differences, Seals recalled ancient texts that spoke of the distinct physical compositions of men and women, a concept now vividly real before her. Kazuria, nearby, seemed to be listening. Then, Kazuria turned the tables, looking down at Seals's chest and innocently asking about this place, referring to her breasts, completely unaware of the social implications of his question. Seals, leaning over him in the bath, reached out and touched his chest, her expression a mix of curiosity and continued bewilderment as she explored the physical differences between them. She continued her exploration, her fingers gripping, as she internally mused that books never truly detailed such sensations, often omitting or censoring these parts. She wondered if her own expectations were now being challenged. Meanwhile, outside the grand mansion, the night deepened, and a voice mused, realizing something significant. So that's it. Elsewhere, a hand held a gleaming key, its intricate design catching the light, while in the background, a figure stood by a dresser, seemingly preparing for the evening. As they walked through a lavish hallway, Lara informed Kazuria that she had forgotten to give her the room key earlier. Seals, still visibly affected by the recent events, watched Lara, who now held the key, her expression a complex mix of lingering arousal and perhaps a touch of jealousy or confusion. Inside a luxurious room, the woman from before, now naked, kneels on the floor amidst scattered clothing, her body trembling as she pleads for help. The black-haired man, his eyes wide with surprise, looks down at her, uttering the name Kyami. Kyami, her face now flushed with a deep blush, looks up at him with wide, uncertain eyes, her expression a mix of vulnerability and anticipation. Moments later, their bodies pressed close. The black-haired man and Kyami are locked in a passionate kiss, her arms wrapped around his neck. He looked at her with a serious gaze, asking if she had known someone was using the bath. She, in turn, appeared surprised and slightly panicked by the question. A hand holding a key appeared, and the legs of a woman in high heels were visible, indicating someone was about to enter. He realized with a jolt that it might be Lala. As Kyami's climax subsided, the man's terror intensified, his eyes wide with alarm as he stared at the open door, the chilling realization that they might be discovered now fully upon him. The maid, having entered the room, stared in shock, while a small, light-haired girl, also naked, looked up at her with wide, surprised eyes. The maid, now composed, explained to the little girl that she had come to deliver a change of clothes, as ordered by Lady Lara. The little girl, still naked, questioned why she was there. Meanwhile, a man with dark, messy hair splashed water on his face, seemingly in a bathroom. The maid's voice called out, asking about him, to which he replied that he was just going to the toilet. Later, the grand palace stood under the night sky, as a voice announced that they had been waiting. Inside the palace, the maid and the little girl stood before a tall, dark-haired woman. The maid apologized for the sudden summons, but the woman dismissed it, then questioned why the little girl was holding a particular book. The little girl held the ornate book tightly, explaining that she would teach Kazaria to play the piano as a thank you. The long-haired woman looked on, surprised by the mention of the piano. The next day, the little girl rushed out of the palace, exclaiming in distress about something called Lunavail. The maid pulled the little girl back, who still clutched the book, telling her that she could not run away, even if she was not ready. Ceres' hands carefully opened an ornate box, revealing its contents. He declared that if he was taught properly, he would show what lay within. Following this, the little girl, her pigtails bouncing, smiled brightly alongside another girl with a bow in her hair. The girl with the bow affirmed, "Of course, Holy Lord." Moments later, the young man, Ceres, stood before a grand piano, his expression a mix of surprise and determination. He mused aloud about the sudden appearance of such a thing, believing it would allow him to return to his original world. The little girl, now identified as his teacher, urged him to begin their piano practice, guiding him towards the instrument. He turned to her, a hopeful smile on his face, asking if they would play together. She responded with an eager yes, as they both took their seats at the piano. As they settled, she instructed him to play only the melody first, as she would handle the accompaniment. He looked at the sheet music, a slight question in his eyes. His hands hovered over the keys, ready to begin, while she prepared to play her part, her fingers poised. She glanced back at him, a subtle look of encouragement, as his finger gently pressed down on a key, producing the first note. He continued to play, a soft smile gracing his lips as he focused on the melody. Her eyes sparkled with joy and satisfaction, clearly pleased with his progress. Together, their hands moved across the keys, creating a harmonious sound. His fingers, more practiced, played a complex arrangement, while her smaller hands provided a steady, simpler rhythm, their combined efforts filling the room with music. He sat at the piano, his fingers poised over the keys as the little girl beside him inquired, "Isn't playing the piano fun?" The scene shifted, revealing the little girl teaching a different young boy, who beamed with joy. "Yes, Mom. Teach me more songs," he exclaimed, eager to learn. He continued to play, his small hands pressing the keys with focused determination, the little girl's head visible beside him as she guided his efforts. Meanwhile, the girl with the bow, her expression thoughtful, seemed to recall something from her own past. Speaking of which, she mused. A memory surfaced, hands gracefully moving across piano keys, and a younger version of herself, smiling alongside the little girl. She remembered, "I also had a time when I was taught like this." As the image of a rain-swept cityscape flickered in her mind, accompanied by the sound of piano keys, a realization dawned on her. Oh, I see. She was now the one teaching the little girl at the piano, but her thoughts drifted to a less pleasant memory. I remembered. At university, I was made a fool of. Two other girls watched them, their expressions a mix of surprise and concern. Another fragment of the past emerged, a stern-looking man addressing an audience, while a younger version of the girl with the bow sat at a piano. She recalled, "Compared to my parents, I only had unpleasant memories." Despite the weight of her past, she remained focused on the present, her hands guiding the little girls as they played together at the grand piano. A quiet reflection settled over her as she looked at the instrument. I really loved piano, she thought, the simple truth cutting through years of complex emotions. She continued to play the grand piano, her fingers dancing across the keys, as Ceres listened intently. He remarked that Kazaria was truly amazing. She then asked him what he meant. She explained that playing with Kazaria was incredibly fun. She also found great joy in playing for Ceres. A soft blush spread across her cheeks as she smiled shyly. Meanwhile, in a different part of the estate, a maid addressed a long-haired woman, mentioning that something had been bothering her. The woman, holding a glass of wine, simply hummed in response. The maid elaborated, stating that recently, a lot of black hair had been found in the rooms and bathrooms. She wondered if there was someone with black hair in the house. The long-haired woman, seated and holding a glass, questioned, "Black hair?" She smiled, suggesting that such a rare hair color would be quite noticeable, and wondered if perhaps an animal had snuck in. The maid bowed apologetically, acknowledging her mistress's point. She then recalled a conversation with Lady Lara from the other day, about a black-haired man she had seen in Algiers, which had made her wonder. The long-haired woman, taking a sip of her wine, instructed the maid to wait, while she went to confirm if an animal had indeed intruded. As she considered the maid's words, the long-haired woman's expression grew serious. Images of a black-haired man, Ceres, and the girl with the bow at a piano flashed through her mind, prompting her to question the significance of black hair and piano. A chilling realization began to dawn on her. 1 month later, the day of the prayer festival arrived. The grand edifice of the central temple stood majestically, surrounded by a bustling crowd gathered for the annual event. The festive atmosphere was palpable, with colorful banners strung across the streets and people carrying baskets of offerings. Ceres and the girl with bow observed the lively scene, with Ceres noting the vibrant decorations. He then noticed something peculiar amidst the festivities. He turned his gaze towards a large, cylindrical pillar erected in the center of the square, wondering about its purpose. It stood tall, bound by ropes, a focal point for the gathering crowd. They discussed the pillar, speculating that it might be a male effigy, perhaps destined to be burned as part of the ritual. Ceres felt a strange premonition, sensing that something was about to unfold. His thoughts drifted to the sound of a bell, a distant chime that seemed to resonate across the entire city, visible in the background with its many buildings and a prominent bell tower. As the evening bell rang, a sudden shift occurred in the crowd. People began to hurl objects towards the central pillar, their actions swift and unexpected. Ceres and the girl with bow watched, bewildered by the sudden outburst. He looked on in surprise as dark, round objects whizzed through the air, narrowly missing him as they flew towards their target. One of the projectiles struck the pillar with a wet splat, its contents bursting upon impact and staining the wooden surface. The crowd's fervor intensified, with more objects raining down on the pillar. Shouts of "Die! It's your fault!" and "Get out!" erupted from the angry participants, creating a chaotic scene. Amidst the strange ritual, a hand extended towards Ceres and the girl with bow, offering them a tomato. They both looked on with expressions of confusion and mild disgust at the peculiar nature of the festival. He looked on, silently, as the girl with bow offered him a tomato, a gesture that seemed to invite his participation in the strange ritual. Ignoring his apprehension, she tossed her own tomato with a playful flourish, explaining that this was simply how the festival was. Other participants around them continued to hurl their projectiles. The projectiles continued to strike the central pillar, splattering its surface with red pulp. The crowd cheered, proclaiming that this act ensured a bountiful harvest for the year. As the ritual continued, Ceres and the girl with bow observed the fervent crowd. She then turned to him, asking what would happen next in the festival's progression. She then elaborated on the festival's deeper meaning, explaining that if couples held hands and spent time together, they would be eternally bound. The thought seemed to fluster her slightly as she spoke. Looking around, they saw numerous couples already engaging in the hand-holding custom, a common sight in this town, as she noted. His gaze fell upon her hand, a silent invitation hanging in the air as their fingers subtly brushed against each other. However, her expression shifted from explanation to a flustered blush, her eyes narrowing in a mix of embarrassment and annoyance at the implication. In the background, a maid and a little girl walked past, seemingly oblivious. Elsewhere, in a stately manner, a maid sat at a grand piano, her fingers poised over the keys, ready to fill the elegant halls with music. Her fingers danced across the keys, producing a melody that resonated through the quiet building. She continued to play the grand piano, her fingers dancing across the keys, filling the opulent hall with a gentle melody. Elsewhere in the grand estate, a nun-like figure expressed her profound admiration for Ceres, remarking that his capabilities would ensure the night's ceremony proceeded without issue. Meanwhile, the maid walked through a long, ornate corridor, carrying a small, intricately designed book. A hand, presumably Casarius, held a key, suggesting a hidden purpose. The little girl, holding a similar ornate book, smiled wistfully, pondering if she could spend even a short time at the festival with Casaria. Her thoughts were interrupted as she stood before a door, a look of surprise on her face. The same hand, holding the key, was now shown inserting it into a lock. As the door opened, she found Casaria and another long-haired woman inside. The long-haired woman greeted her, acknowledging her return. Her expression now stern, she confronted the long-haired woman, demanding to know what she was doing in her room and what she was searching for. The woman held the ornate book. She then questioned the book itself, asking why it was called Lunavail. The long-haired woman explained that the book must not be shown to Casaria, implying a significant secret or danger associated with it. Elsewhere, a maid observed the scene through binoculars, while another stood by a window. Inside a bedroom, a third maid watched the little girl, who was now resting on a bed, as if under observation. The maid with binoculars remarked that she had been instructed to keep an eye on Casaria for the past month. With a stern expression, the long-haired woman declared that it had been revealed he was a man. Her eyes wide with shock, the little girl reacted to the revelation, a gasp escaping her lips. The scene shifted to a grim spectacle, a figure bound to a pyre, engulfed in flames, as a crowd, including the little girl, Ceres, and the girl with the bow, watched in horror. Other observers also bore witness to the burning. Following the disturbing vision, the perspective widened to reveal a bustling town square, adorned with festive lights and filled with people. The little girl and the girl with the bow stood among the crowd, looking up at the activity. Amidst the lively atmosphere, Ceres and the girl with the bow joined the celebration, dancing joyfully with others in the square. Suddenly, a hand gently held a small, bird-like creature, its feathers intricately detailed. Meanwhile, Maid 1 and another maid, Maid 3, observed from a discreet doorway, their expressions unreadable as they watched the unfolding events. The long-haired woman, her gaze sharp and resolute, issued a command. Casaria was to be apprehended and punished immediately. In a well-appointed room, Maid 2 relayed the order, but Maid 1 questioned it, her voice tinged with surprise, asking about Casaria. A maid, observing from a distance, reported to Ceres that she had been ordered to watch Casaria for the past month. She urged him to remain calm. Meanwhile, the long-haired woman, her expression grim, revealed a shocking truth. It had been determined that Casaria was, in fact, a man. She held a fan to her mouth, her eyes narrowed with concern. The little girl, hearing this revelation, gasped in disbelief. Her eyes widened, and the ornate book she had been holding slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. Still reeling from the news, she confronted the long-haired woman, demanding to know why this could be true. "Wait, that can't be right," she insisted, her voice trembling. She continued to protest, questioning how Casaria could be a man, and asserting that such a person would be useless. The long-haired woman averted her gaze, unable to meet the little girl's distressed eyes. The girl, clutching her hands to her chest, insisted that she had always been taught otherwise, and that Casaria was different. Kneeling on the floor, the little girl reflected on Casaria's many virtues. She recalled how Casaria was always clean, articulate, skilled at the piano, honest, and incredibly kind. She looked up at the long-haired woman, her eyes filled with conviction, declaring that such a person could not be a man. She asserted that the woman simply did not understand because she had never truly seen a man. "Do you understand, Siri-sama?" she cried out, her voice filled with desperation. The long-haired woman, her expression hardening, warned her that if Kazuria was not immediately eliminated, dire consequences would follow. She reminded the little girl that protecting the people required women, and then sternly asked if Siri-sama intended to break the Danchalier faith's precepts. The little girl remained kneeling, her head bowed in contemplation. Her thoughts drifted to the world's teachings. Men were cruel and troublesome, and if they vanished, the world would be free from hunger and become prosperous. Therefore, they had to be eliminated from this world, and one must never look upon them. Her eyes grew dim with the weight of these doctrines, as a tall, hooded figure and another small girl stood silently behind her. She looked up at Ceres, who smiled brightly, as a memory or a thought echoed in her mind. In this world, men were unnecessary. Moments later, Ceres' hand extended, holding a small, flat object. He then offered the object, a harmonica, to the long-haired woman, who reached out to receive it. Meanwhile, the bustling city stretched out under a wide sky, its white buildings clustered together. Elsewhere, the little girl, still munching on something, listened as the girl with bow remarked that it was strange, as the Holy Emperor should be performing the ceremony soon. The little girl then questioned if the ceremony involved playing the piano. The girl with bow confirmed, pointing towards a grand gazebo in the distance, indicating that was where it would take place. As the conversation continued, the long-haired woman approached Kazuria, who sat alone on a bench, and asked if she felt a gaze upon her. Kazuria's eyes widened slightly, a question forming on her lips as she wondered aloud about a gaze. Her surprise intensified as she looked around, a growing unease reflected in her eyes. Suddenly, two figures in uniform, armed with swords, appeared before her, causing Kazuria to gasp in shock, realizing they were police. She quickly instructed Kyami to wait and hide for safety, while her gaze fell upon a burning structure. She wondered if it was merely standard equipment, unable to discern its true purpose. The burning structure stood at the heart of a bustling town square, surrounded by a multitude of people. The air was thick with anticipation, or perhaps dread, as the crowd gathered. Suddenly, a flurry of movement erupted among the onlookers as many feet began to run, their hurried steps echoing through the square. Amidst the growing commotion, she realized she was surrounded. A chilling thought crossed her mind. Could her true identity as a man have been exposed? Her face contorted with a mix of fear and defiance as she grappled with the possibility of her secret being revealed. Meanwhile, one of the guards, her expression stern, commanded silence from the surrounding crowd. The guards then began to escort her through the throng of onlookers, who parted to create a path. Many faces in the crowd, including the little girl, the maid, and a nun, watched with expressions of surprise and concern as she was led away. From a distance, a hooded figure and another little girl observed the procession from beneath an archway. Elsewhere, Ceres stood in quiet contemplation, his thoughts seemingly far away. He reflected on the events, a faint sense of unease settling over him as images of Kazuria's distress, the little girl's concern, the maid's worry, and the girl with Bao's apprehension flashed through his mind. He had never truly felt the weight of it all until now. The grand ceremony continued in the square, the central burning structure casting an ominous glow over the gathered crowd. Many wondered aloud if Ceres was truly such a great person, or if there was something more to his presence. As the ceremony unfolded, the second little girl, shrouded in shadow, watched with an intense, unblinking gaze, her silhouette stark against the fiery backdrop. Meanwhile, Kazuria's eyes widened in terror as a horrifying realization dawned upon him. Was he to face a public execution right here, in this very place? The city was alive with the harvest festival, a grand prayer for a bountiful yield. Amidst the bustling crowds, the police maintained a watchful presence, surrounding the central square where the main ceremony was to take place. He watched the scene unfold, a chilling premonition settling over him. He wondered if his disguise, the maid's uniform he wore, might already be compromised, his true identity as a boy on the verge of exposure. In the distance, a pyre burned brightly. Then, the holy archangel arrived, her presence commanding attention as she prepared to dispense the sacred holy water. With practiced grace, she began to ladle the holy water from a large, ornate pot, preparing it for the purification ritual. Meanwhile, among the onlookers, a small girl in a cap observed the proceedings, explaining that the area was being purified before the main ceremony. She pointed out the ongoing ritual. The disguised boy turned to her, asking if this ritual was an annual occurrence. She confirmed it was, stating that it happened every year without fail. He absorbed her words, a thought forming in his mind. If the security measures were always the same, then there was still a chance his disguise remained undetected. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a girl with small horns on her head, who appeared amidst the crowd, looking visibly distressed and surprised, as if the holy water had affected her. She extended her arm, pointing intently towards something or someone unseen in the distance. A noble girl, holding a fan, appeared with a furious expression, shouting commands to the police to surround someone and clear the way, as officers struggled against a pushing crowd. The noble girl's command was met with immediate action as a sword was swiftly drawn, its sharp edge glinting. A gasp escaped someone's lips. The two girls, now fully exposed, found themselves encircled by a vast number of armed individuals, their blades pointed inward. It was clear their disguise had been completely compromised. Trapped and outnumbered, the cap-wearing girl realized the gravity of their situation, her eyes wide with alarm. Beside her, the horned girl shared her apprehension, understanding the futility of resistance against such overwhelming force. Meanwhile, the noble girl clenched her fist, her resolve hardening as she addressed the bewildered crowd. She declared that this was no time for hesitation or minor displays of power, prompting a shocked bystander to question her, asking what in the world was happening, addressing her as Lady Lara. She then revealed the reason for the sudden upheaval, accusing the individual of having infiltrated the city, first disguised as a boy, and then even as a girl. Her gaze sharpened as she held her fan, stating that their investigation was complete. She demanded the individual reveal their true identity, threatening punishment if they refused, addressing them as Kamiai. The horned girl watched, her expression a mix of shock and dawning realization. The cap-wearing girl, hearing the accusation, immediately protested, calling out to Lady Lara and vehemently denying that the person in question was a boy. The horned girl, standing beside her, looked on with growing concern. The noble girl, however, dismissed the protest with a condescending tone, remarking on their desperation. She then mused aloud that she had never seen Kami's bare skin, implying that they had been deliberately hiding something all along. The cap-wearing girl, incensed by the insinuation, retorted sharply, questioning if Lady Lara herself might be a man, before emphatically declaring that she was, in fact, a true mate. In response, the noble girl pointed directly at the cap-wearing girl, issuing a chilling command for her to remove her clothes immediately. The cap-wearing girl gasped in shock, internally addressing Lady Lara, while the horned girl looked on in horror. The noble girl's eye narrowed, reiterating her demand as an absolute order to Kamiai. She internally mused about her small chest, a secret she kept from Lady Lara, a secret that was now on the verge of being exposed. As her secret weighed heavily, she was forcibly pulled, her expression downcast, while the horned girl watched in distress. The commotion intensified as the noble girl, her face contorted in anger, observed the unfolding scene, while the surrounding onlookers gasped in shock. Meanwhile, the horned girl, her concern deepening, uttered a name, Kazuria. In that moment, the disguise was shed, revealing a young man with short, dark hair, who defiantly declared, "I am a man." His declaration sent a ripple of disbelief through the crowd, who murmured in shock, questioning if he truly was a man, while the horned girl covered her mouth in stunned horror. The revelation ignited a furious outcry from the onlookers, who screamed at him, demanding to know what he was doing and accusing him of deception, even as someone called out his alias, Kamiai. His cap flew off as he was pushed back. Amidst the chaos, the situation escalated violently as the crowd scattered, and a hand, likely belonging to the noble girl, produced a dark, apple-like object. Dark projectiles then rained down, striking the ground around the young man as he instinctively shielded the horned girl, a powerful explosion erupting around them. The aftermath of the blast was immediate and destructive. A wooden structure burst into flames, and dark, viscous splatters coated the surrounding surfaces. On the scorched ground, the young man lay protectively over the horned girl, both covered in the dark, gooey residue. As a voice from the still present, though scattered, crowd asked, "Are you all right, Kamiai?" He grimaced in pain, attempting to reassure her that despite the appearance of blood, the dark splatters were merely tomatoes, though he admitted the impact still hurt. The horned girl, however, looked at him with wide, concerned eyes, pointing out what appeared to be blood, questioning his explanation. Still reeling from the attack, he looked up, his face streaked with blood and grime, and whispered the name, Sarisa. The horned girl remained close, her own small body bruised and covered in the dark residue. Moments later, the scene shifted dramatically. He and the horned girl were forced to kneel before a large, burning effigy, surrounded by a silent, judging crowd. A voice boomed, declaring, "Kazuria, in the name of the holy archangel." The noble girl, Lady Lara, stood before them, her expression stern and unforgiving, as she pronounced their fate. "I will punish you." Behind her, he gripped the horned girl, his mind racing, desperately wondering, "What should I do? How can we escape from here?" Kamiai's face contorted with fury as she declared her intent to punish. Elsewhere, a somber ritual was underway, with Kazuria bound to a pyre, his sacrifice invoked in the name of the holy archangel. Bound and facing the ominous pyre, he desperately considered his options, his mind racing with the question of how he might possibly escape his dire predicament. As he remained on the ground, a stern voice from a woman in elegant attire confirmed his identity, recognizing him as a man of Algiers. He looked up, a faint, almost defiant smile on his face, and addressed her by her given name, Lady Lara. Lady Lara, her expression sharp and unyielding, immediately rebuked him, questioning why a man like him would dare use her personal name. Kamiai, standing protectively beside Kazuria, felt a growing sense of dread, realizing the overwhelming odds against their escape as they were surrounded by a silent, imposing crowd. Her distress evident, Kamiai called out Kazuria's name, while he, looking downcast, internally questioned if this was truly where his life would end, as the pyre burned ominously nearby. Kamiai, stepping forward with outstretched arms, desperately pleaded with Lady Lara to intervene and save Kazuria from his impending doom. Lady Lara, maintaining her stern composure, addressed Kamiai by her name, while Kamiai, her face etched with desperation, attempted to argue her case. Lady Lara, calmly fanning herself, dismissed Kamiai's plea with a subtle smirk, remarking that she had not believed Lady Lara would care about Kazuria's fate. The noblewoman, still holding her fan, dismissed the pleas of others, telling them not to speak ill of her. A girl with short, light hair looked on with frustration, while another, with long, light hair, observed a small figure on the ground. Kamei, wearing her distinctive cap, looked down with a worried expression. In the background, other girls discussed how Kazuria had been taught piano and had become remarkably skilled. Kamei, distressed, tried to comfort Kazuria, who stood with his hand to his mouth, looking down. A group of women in the background murmured, questioning what that child was saying and dismissing it as impossible. Kazuria looked up, a faint smile gracing his lips, as if acknowledging a silent gratitude. Kamei, still in her maid uniform, looked on with a pained expression, realizing that the anger of the crowd was now directed at her. Blood splattered the floor nearby. The grand hall was filled with onlookers as Kazuria and Kamei stood before a towering structure, likely the pyre. A voice from the crowd remarked that they finally understood their position. Lady Lara, with a cunning smile, addressed Kazuria directly, stating that from this moment, she would have him play the piano. Kazuria looked up, startled by the unexpected command, realizing this might be a chance to survive. Lady Lara, gesturing grandly, declared that someone connected to Algiers could not be punished normally. Kamei stood nearby, listening intently, unable to comprehend what the noblewoman was saying. Lady Lara's heeled shoes clicked on the stone floor as she walked away, her decision made. Kazuria looked down, his expression a mix of relief and apprehension. Lady Lara, with Kamei standing behind her, explained that this event would be treated as an accident during the festival. She held her fan to her mouth, her eyes wide with a chilling intensity, as she pressed Kazuria. She declared that if he was truly connected to Algiers, he would have no grounds to object to her demands. With a commanding tone, she ordered him to play the piano, adding that a simple accident would be far worse than merely burning the instrument. Kamei watched the exchange, her expression etched with distress. He clenched his fist, a silent acknowledgement that he had no other choice but to comply with Lady Lara's cruel ultimatum. Kamei turned her head away, her voice filled with sorrow as she apologized to Kazuria. She explained that as a holy archangel, she could not forgive a man like him. Kazuria looked at her, uttering her true name, Ceres. She walked away, her back to him, her apology echoing softly as she ascended the steps, leaving him to face his fate alone. Soon, logs were piled high around the grand piano. Flames erupted with a sudden roar, and a voice commanded, "Light the fire." Below, a growing crowd gathered, their silhouettes stark against the burgeoning inferno, watching the scene unfold. Kazuria sat at the piano, the rising flames already licking at the edges of the platform. He thought to himself, what a mess. I never imagined I would die this way. He acknowledged that there was nothing else he could do, and that playing the piano in such a dire situation felt absurd. Yet, he resolved to compose himself and focus his mind. The flames intensified, consuming the pillars and the structure around him, creating a fiery cage. Kazuria remained seated, a solitary figure amidst the raging inferno, seemingly resigned to his fate. Then, his hands began to move, a blur of motion across the keys, as he started to play. The music a stark contrast to the destructive power surrounding him. As his music filled the air, a powerful light erupted from the piano, captivating the entire crowd. Among them, the horn girl and other onlookers reacted with wide-eyed astonishment to the unexpected melody. He continued his intense piano performance, his brow furrowed in concentration as sweat beaded on his skin. From a distance, Lady Lara observed, her thoughts questioning if this path was truly righteous. Nearby, the silhouettes of Kamei and the Holy Archangel watched the unfolding spectacle. As he played, Kamei turned away from the piano, her gaze troubled. She recalled Lady Lara's words, a cynical declaration that men were crude and foolish in this world, a truth Kamei had heard countless times and accepted as fact. Yet, a deep conflict stirred within her. Her internal conflict reached a breaking point, and tears streamed down Kamei's face. She clutched her hands to her chest, her voice trembling as she confessed the profound sadness she would feel if Kazuria were to perish. The inferno raged on around them, its flames casting dancing shadows. Kamei remained silent, her distress evident as she grappled with her helplessness amidst the escalating danger. A young girl, Kamei, weeps openly, her face contorted in anguish. She laments that she would be heartbroken if Kazuria were to die. She watches with a somber expression as a massive structure burns fiercely in the distance, surrounded by a throng of onlookers. Flames consume what appears to be a ceremonial pyre. Meanwhile, a young man, Kazuria, clenches his jaw, his eyes shut tight in a grimace. His hands are raised, as if in prayer or resignation, while behind him, a towering, armored figure is engulfed in roaring flames, witnessed by a silent crowd. Kamei recalls the pervasive teaching of her world, that men are utterly unnecessary. She remembers standing among other girls, the belief that this societal truth was simply natural, an unquestioned reality. Yet, a subtle unease had always lingered within her. The unease had begun at some unknown point, a quiet dissonance against the established doctrine, as she gazed upon the familiar cityscape. In a memory from her childhood, a younger Kamei, then called Seals, joyfully calls out to her mother in front of a grand building. Her mother, visibly pregnant, gently asks Seals if she is excited for the baby to be born soon. Seals, with wide, innocent eyes, affirms her excitement, expressing her desire for a cute little sister. Several months later, the young Seals again calls out for her mother, her voice echoing under a cloudy sky. Her mother, now no longer pregnant, looks down at Seals with a sorrowful expression, apologizing and revealing that the new baby was a boy this time. Seals looks up, confused by the news. She remembered a time from her youth, a moment when she was told to wait just a little longer. She had asked where the baby had gone, but she dared not press further, for everyone around her wore expressions that suggested it was a matter best left unspoken. It was for the happiness of women. They believed that men were evil, and this was the correct way. Then, a different memory surfaced, one where she wore small horns, her eyes wide with surprise as a hand reached out towards her. She and others stood silhouetted against a raging fire, the flames consuming a figure in the distance, a sight that made her question what this song truly was. The vision faded, returning her to a cherished memory of playing a song with Kazuria, surrounded by images of their shared musical moments. Her young face flushed with a mix of emotions, her brow furrowed in a subtle expression of concern. A voice then asked her name, and she replied, "I am Kamiai." The other, Lady Lara, then revealed that Kazuria had spoken of her. She bristled slightly, thinking that Kazuria was quick to anger, but then paused, a different thought forming. A gentle smile touched her lips as she considered Kazuria to be a very good child. Her gaze then lifted, her expression shifting to one of slight apprehension as she addressed the Holy Archangel. She found herself once again amidst the flickering flames, a silent observer to the silhouettes of figures, one smaller and seemingly distressed, being comforted by a taller presence. The heat was palpable, even in memory. The vision shifted, and she saw Lady Lara, her expression serene as she spoke of the inherent evil of being born male. In the distance, a figure resembling Seal stood bathed in a soft glow, while nearby, the horn girl stood beside her, listening intently to Lady Lara's words. Lady Lara continued, confirming her earlier statement to the two girls, asserting that her perspective was correct. Her composure broke suddenly, her eyes widening in shock as she exclaimed in disbelief. Her hand, holding a ladle, hovered over a large pot, as if interrupted mid-action. A violent splash erupted, sending water flying in all directions, followed by the sight of a rounded surface, perhaps the top of someone's head, being drenched. She stood drenched and shivering, a single thought echoing in her mind. "I'm the strange one." Water streamed down her face as a large ladle continued to pour liquid over her head. Despite the cold water, her mind drifted to another memory, a vision of seals leaping into a raging fire. She questioned the strangeness of it all, wondering if jumping into the flames was truly a way to meet Kazuria. Her cheeks felt warm, even as tears mixed with the water on her face, and a forced smile stretched across her lips. The scene abruptly shifted to a burning room, where Seals, now seemingly older and identified as Kazuria, stood amidst the inferno, looking startled. He remained in the heart of the blaze, his body hunched over, as if shielding something or someone from the destructive flames that consumed the structure around him. He looked startled, his eyes wide with surprise as the girl with the small horns embraced him tightly from behind, calling out his name, "Seal-sama?" As the flames raged around them, she reassured him, stating that with so much burning, no one would be able to see them. He simply replied, "It's all right." Then, with a sudden movement, she pressed her lips against his. Her eyes closed in a moment of desperate intimacy amidst the chaos. Her breath hitched as their kiss deepened, and in the wider view, she was seen holding him tightly, engulfed by the towering flames that threatened to consume them both. The grand structure around them was utterly consumed, its ornate architecture collapsing into a maelstrom of fire and debris, leaving nothing but ruin. A tender moment unfolded as a dark-haired boy and a light-haired girl shared a kiss, their faces close, eyes closed in the embrace. The intimacy of the kiss was abruptly contrasted by a vision of chaos. A massive structure burned fiercely, its flames illuminating the surrounding crowd. Elsewhere, the dark-haired boy, now appearing as Seals, stood near another burning edifice, a light-haired girl beside him, her expression one of concern. A light-haired girl, Kamiai, her cheeks flushed, confessed that she simply could not have abandoned something important. Urging him forward, Kamiai declared they must flee, pulling Seals along through a shimmering, ethereal space. He questioned her sudden command, wondering why they needed to run. Far from the immediate turmoil, a sprawling city lay under a clear sky, its buildings clustered together, hinting at a world beyond the immediate crisis. Within this city, outside a grand, ornate building with a distinctive domed archway, several young girls gathered. Among them, Lady Lara, with her dark hair, stood with Kamiai and another light-haired girl, observing the surroundings. Lady Lara's gaze was sharp and intense, her brow furrowed in a determined expression as she covered her mouth, deep in thought or perhaps suppressing a reaction. Nearby, Kamiai and other girls knelt around a dark, charred area, their faces etched with dismay. Kamiai voiced her distress, wondering if something was truly gone, if it had been consumed by fire. The remnants of the destruction were stark, a close view revealing twisted, blackened debris, confirming the extent of the damage. As the girls processed the scene, Lady Lara, her back to the grand building, issued a command to clean it up. Kamiai, standing nearby, acknowledged her with a respectful, "Yes, Lady Seals." Still consumed by past events, Lady Lara questioned why such a thing had happened. She recalled the piano, wondering if anyone had heard it, and admitted that the memory still made her heart pound. She felt a profound sense of dread. Meanwhile, in a different time, two young figures, a boy and a girl, hurried through a dark, narrow passage, their hands clasped tightly together. They emerged into the light through an archway, their silhouettes briefly visible against the brighter world outside. Their hands remained intertwined, a silent testament to their shared journey and mutual reliance. The passage led them into a sprawling city, a labyrinth of buildings and hidden paths. The boy mused that such a place, with its many secret routes, could connect to anywhere. He then realized the implication. A secret escape route existed beneath the piano. The thought brought a wry smile to his face, a mix of surprise and understanding. As they continued their journey through the city, the girl, Kamei, asserted that only the Holy Archangel knew of this particular escape route. She worried that if they lingered, they would quickly be discovered. They reached an old stone archway, a gateway to a more open, rugged landscape. The boy wondered aloud where they were, noting that no one should be able to reach this place. Inside a nearby building, the girl declared it a shelter, a place where they could finally rest. She collapsed onto a simple bed, stretching her weary limbs, a sigh escaping her lips. The boy, too, found respite, falling into a deep sleep. He had believed he was going to die. The boy, Seals, rested deeply on the bed, while Kamei, the horned girl, sat nearby, watching over him. Even in his sleep, he seemed troubled, his mind replaying a vivid memory or dream of Kamei amidst a raging inferno, her fingers still on the keys of a piano as flames engulfed the structure around her. He awoke with a start, his eyes wide with concern, immediately asking if she had sustained any injuries from the fire he had seen her in. Kamei, sitting on the adjacent bed, reassured him that she was unharmed, but then her expression shifted, and she began to inquire about his own well-being, specifically mentioning his alias, Kazuria. As they stood, Kamei's gaze fell upon his hair, and she pointed, asking if it had been singed or damaged in some way. He denied any damage, but she persisted, explaining that she was simply unaccustomed to seeing his dark hair, implying a previous appearance. With a gentle touch, she reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of comfort and affection. Without warning, she leaned in and kissed him deeply, her action surprising him completely. Her face flushed crimson, her eyes squeezed shut in a mixture of embarrassment and intense emotion. Still holding him, she confessed that she understood the implications of her actions, even as he, clearly flustered, questioned if such a thing was truly acceptable given his identity as a boy. Kamei lay beside Seals in the bed, her expression troubled as she murmured words of hesitation. Her mind drifted, recalling fragmented memories and echoing voices that commanded her to punish and declared men utterly unnecessary in this world. The weight of these thoughts caused her distress, making her feel overwhelmed. Feeling an intense heat rising within her, she began to shed her clothes, the fabric rustling softly as it fell away. Seals watched her, his eyes wide with surprise at her actions. She averted her gaze, a deep blush spreading across her face, and quietly asked him not to stare so intently. Standing before him in only her undergarments, Kamei hugged herself, her embarrassment evident in her downcast eyes and flushed cheeks. Seals, still in his maid uniform, questioned if she had received some form of punishment, but she simply dismissed his concern, stating it was fine. Moments later, Seals's maid uniform lay discarded on the floor as he pulled Kamei into a close embrace, both now clad only in their underwear. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, a culmination of the unspoken tension between them. Moments later, the intense pleasure subsided, and he stood beside the bed, watching her sleep peacefully, a soft smile gracing her lips. He then collapsed to the floor, utterly spent, realizing he was more exhausted than he had ever been, even more so than after a grueling festival. He wondered if it was finally over. As he lay there, a figure appeared in the open doorway, Kamei. He looked up, startled, wondering why she was there. She pointed a finger at him, her expression stern, and declared that she had heard from the Holy Lord that he was attempting to escape to this very location. Other figures stood silently behind her, observing the scene. Kamei, having discovered Kazuria's escape attempt, now presented him with his belongings, including a white bag. He expressed his gratitude for her retrieving them. He looked at her with a surprised expression as she added that there was something else she had brought. She then revealed a highly ornate, decorative case, prompting him to exclaim, "Lunavail." He beamed, stating that he had finally obtained it, while she held the case with a neutral expression. As he looked at Kamei, he began to speak, but she interrupted him with a stern look. She glared at him, demanding to know if he thought it was acceptable to use such language, and revealed that she had been waiting for them to finish their activities for a long time. She continued, explaining that she had been waiting since noon, and that it had been an incredibly long and difficult wait. Kamei then held the ornate case closer, suggesting that he should also do something for her in return. He covered his face in despair, realizing the situation was hopeless. She, meanwhile, held the Lunavail, asking if he truly didn't care what happened to it, and warned him not to touch it. He reluctantly took the Lunavail from her, muttering that it was useless to resist, and wondering why he was the one being scolded for the situation. He carefully opened the ornate case, the sound of it unlatching echoing softly. However, as he and Kamei peered inside, a wave of shock washed over them. The case, which was supposed to hold the precious Lunavail, was completely empty. Kamei voiced her disbelief, questioning if it truly held nothing. A grand, ornate mansion stood under a clear sky, its intricate architecture a testament to wealth and power. Inside, a voice demanded to know what had happened, questioning why the Lunavail was gone. Another voice, filled with trepidation, offered a humble apology. The urgency of the situation was palpable as a woman with long, dark hair, her face etched with alarm, commanded an attendant to immediately search for Kamei. The attendant acknowledged the order, while the woman's thoughts raced, realizing the gravity of the situation for Lara-sama. Her alarm quickly turned to incandescent fury. The woman, Lara, clenched her fists, her teeth gritted as she learned that a hidden escape route had been discovered beneath a piano in the burning plaza. She seethed, vowing never to forgive that filthy man for allowing Kayami to take the Lunavail. Her rage intensified, her eyes wide with a fierce determination. She ordered 2 women in nuns' habits to use any means necessary to find Kayami and bring her before her. The nuns promptly affirmed their understanding. Far from the mansion's turmoil, a train sped along its tracks, its wheels churning rhythmically, carrying its passengers away from the unfolding chaos. Inside one of the carriages, a young man, Kazuria, rested, his eyes closed in sleep. He reflected on his escape from the Lunavail domain, acknowledging that he owed his freedom to Seals and Kayami. The journey continued, eventually bringing them to the familiar lands of Algiers, where they sought out Cheryl's residence. Upon their arrival, Kazuria and Seals were met with an unexpected obstacle. A guard at the entrance informed them that they could not enter without a pass, leaving them surprised and uncertain. The situation grew more complicated as Kayami joined them at the gate, observing their predicament. The guard reiterated that any pass they might possess was for entering Lunavail, and thus, he could do nothing to grant them entry to this specific location. As Kazuria expressed his concern, reminding Kayami that they were currently fleeing and needed to avoid drawing attention, she simply smiled, her hands clasped confidently. She declared that she would personally ask the Holy Emperor for assistance. She, having confidently offered her assistance, now questioned how they would gain entry. Kazuria, considering their options, suggested that if they could somehow contact Cheryl, it might be possible. Kayami then called out, addressing someone as commander. The 3rd District Unit Commander, Lunavail, stood with a serious and unwavering expression. Kayami, surprised by a sudden realization, pointed at Kazuria and exclaimed that he was Cheryl Samus. He, looking somewhat sheepish, apologized and asked if they could convey to Cheryl that he had arrived. Kayami and Seals, both surprised, questioned if he knew the police. Elena, after a moment of consideration, reluctantly agreed to convey the message, but made it clear it would be only this once. She then turned to someone off-panel, asking if this was acceptable. Commander. Kazuria smiled, relieved by her agreement, while Kayami and Seals looked on with thoughtful, slightly confused expressions. Meanwhile, at the Grand Algiers family mansion, a voice exclaimed in shock, "What? Kazuria has returned." Cheryl Algiers, the daughter of the Algiers family, beamed with joy, her eyes wide as she emphatically declared, "Let him in immediately." She dashed through the opulent halls of the mansion, calling out, "Kazuya," as a maid watched her with a surprised expression. Mary Dorlands, the Algiers family head maid, observed the young noblewoman's excited chatter, noting how happily she spoke. She stood outside the Grand Algiers residence, a silent observer. A thought crossed her mind, a quiet acknowledgement that Kazuria must have been eagerly awaited. Inside the Grand Algiers residence, a tea party was in full swing. Cheryl Algiers, surrounded by Seals, Kayami, Lunavail, Kazuria, and 2 young children, suddenly questioned Seals, demanding to know who she was. She calmly introduced herself as Seals and the other girl as Kayami, explaining that they had been greatly indebted to Kazuria during their time in Lunavail. He, meanwhile, casually sipped his tea, then remembered to mention, almost as an afterthought, that his real name was Kazuya. This revelation visibly startled both Seals and Kayami. Cheryl, still processing the introductions, expressed a growing sense of unease. She turned to Seals and Kayami, questioning if they truly knew nothing about Kazuria's past. Looking flustered, Seals attempted to clarify her relationship with Kazuria, stating that they had become quite intimate. Kayami, intrigued, immediately pressed her for examples. She continued, blushing slightly, to describe their intimacy, implying they had loved each other all night. Kazuria, utterly shocked by her candidness, promptly spat out his tea. Still blushing, Seals affirmed that the experience had been very good, then turned her gaze to Kayami, asking about her own experiences. He, thoroughly embarrassed, quickly interjected, attempting to correct Seals. He clarified that it wasn't just all night, but rather many times, almost every day. With a determined and slightly annoyed expression, she interjected, adding that she had also helped him with his bath. She gasped in surprise, exclaiming, "Oh, you." Beside her, Cheryl Algiers, equally stunned, questioned, "Is that so?" Kayami continued, asserting that Kazuria had been very comfortable. Cheryl, her eyes wide with disbelief, demanded, What do you mean by that?" Overwhelmed by the intimate revelations, Kazuria fled the scene, dashing through a doorway in a desperate attempt to escape the awkward situation. He continued his frantic escape, glancing back with a distressed expression as he muttered that he simply could not stay there, finding it too uncomfortable. Seals, ever composed, calmly stated that she would not blame him, while Kayami, with a hint of curiosity, asked why he was running away. Seals then shifted the conversation, telling him that more importantly, he needed to explain his reason for returning. Kazuria, taken aback, could only manage a surprised sound. Seals stood before Kazuria, her gaze direct, and asked if he had failed to find Lunavail. He looked away, then back at her, hesitantly replying, "No, I thought I had it." Seals then directed his attention to a small, empty box on a nearby table, instructing him to look at it. Kazuria peered into the container, questioning, "Empty?" She looked intently at him, her expression serious, as she began to speak. "This is..." He quickly interjected, "No, actually, at the bottom." Seals then pulled a piece of sheet music from the box, her eyes widening in surprise as she exclaimed, "Sheet music?" The title of the composition was clearly visible, Lunavail, Mirror of Dreams. A young woman, Luzier, stared intently at a sheet of music, her eyes widening in surprise as she recognized the title. Lunavail's mirror. Kazuya, standing nearby, explained his initial assumption, gesturing with his hands. He had imagined the mirror as a physical object one might reach into, something tangible. Luzier, meanwhile, stood before a grand, ornate mirror, observing her own reflection. She mused that she, too, had envisioned using the mirror to reflect herself, pondering its true purpose. Kazuya then inquired if she had attempted to play the music. Luzier paused, considering his question, before stating that she needed to confirm something first. He pressed further, asking if the ancient text contained any relevant information. She confirmed that they did. Later, in a more comfortable lounge, Luzier elaborated on her findings. The ancient text spoke of using Lunavail to grant wishes, yet they offered no specific instructions on how to actually activate or utilize its power. Kazuya, connecting the pieces, suggested that perhaps playing the music itself was the key to granting a wish. Luzier agreed, acknowledging it as the most probable explanation. Before they could delve deeper into their theory, a voice called out from outside the grand mansion, signaling an interruption. Moments later, a young girl named Peter rushed towards Kazuya, her face alight with relief. She called out his name, expressing her joy that he was safe. Peter then asked Kazuya if his business with Luzier was concluded. He responded with a vague assurance that it was, somehow, taken care of. Her voice cut through the air, asking Kazuya about something specific. He looked up, a question forming on his lips, wondering what she was referring to. She continued, her voice filled with a sense of urgency, explaining that she had received something from Lady Cheryl. Moments later, Peter stood before Kazuya, gesturing wildly towards the scattered remains of what appeared to be a broken carriage. She had clearly been attempting to construct something. As they stood together, Peter chuckled softly, remarking that Kazuya had become much kinder since his arrival. She then mused that the broken parts were just useless junk anyway. Kazuya, however, seemed to realize something, letting out a small sound of understanding. She then leaned in, confiding that she had something she wanted to build. He looked at her, curious, asking what kind of thing she wanted to make. Her eyes widened with excitement as she declared her intention to build a car, a self-propelled vehicle, just as Kazuya had described. He recoiled in shock, his hands flying up in disbelief. He questioned her, demanding to know if she truly believed she could build such a thing. Despite his skepticism, Peter had indeed constructed a rudimentary vehicle from the carriage parts. She sat on it, looking somewhat dejected, admitting that the ride was still a bit rough and uncomfortable. Kazuya, observing her, asked if it even moved. She confirmed that it did, at least somewhat. As Kazuya lay sprawled on the ground, having apparently been thrown from the vehicle, Peter pondered the ride quality, wondering if it failed to absorb impacts properly. She then looked at Kazuya, acknowledging that she didn't know how to fix it. She then looked down at Kazuya, who was still on the ground, a slight smile playing on her lips. He, in turn, thought to himself that Peter truly loved building things like this. She stood quietly in the grand room, observing as Luzier addressed Kazuya, inquiring if he had completed his greetings. He simply affirmed that he had. He wore a subtle smirk, a thought crossing his mind that this might be the final occasion. Then, he pressed, and then, as he looked towards Luzier and Peter, who were now seated, he questioned why everyone had assembled. Luzier clarified that they were there to hear him play the piano. He conceded, understanding the reason. He then took his place at the piano, his fingers resting on the keys, a somber thought echoing in his mind. This would be the final time he shared such a moment with them. His gaze lowered, and the thought continued, extending to the world itself. With a surge of determination, his fingers flew across the keys, the music a conduit for his fervent resolve. He would return to his original world. As he played, the music resonated through the grand hall, captivating Luzier and Peter, who watched with expressions of pure delight and wonder. Their faces beamed, eyes wide with joy and excitement, completely engrossed in the performance. Yet, as his performance reached its crescendo, the very fabric of the room began to distort, vertical lines appearing as if tearing through reality. He cried out, "Return!" Suddenly, the grand hall vanished, replaced by the familiar sight of the mansion. Peter, who had been engrossed in her work on the carriage wheel, looked up with a puzzled expression, as if sensing a disturbance, before returning to her task, still seemingly confused. She found herself slumped against a plush chair, utterly drained, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Beside her, Luzier also appeared spent, her head bowed. Moments later, Peter lay sprawled on the floor, seemingly unconscious, while Luzier, still looking weary, leaned over her, perhaps checking on her condition. Elsewhere, Kazuya blinked, a look of profound confusion and mild alarm crossing his face, as if he had just awoken from a strange dream. He soon found himself in a grand, unfamiliar building, a place known as Lunavail. A voice within him declared that, from this point forward, he would become the partner to everyone within its walls. Inside, he listened intently as Luzier explained that, according to the traditions of the Danchery religion, he was expected to play a special piano. He looked at her, surprised by this revelation. She then inquired about the location of this particular instrument. Still processing the information, he seemed taken aback when Luzier revealed that the special piano was located on the distant western continent. She further clarified that the specific place was a male ranch, emphasizing the word with a pointed finger, leaving Kazuya to ponder the implications of such a location. His thoughts were interrupted as he found himself looking out over a vast field where several men were crawling on the ground, a sight that left him utterly bewildered. The journey to the ranch was about to begin. Kazuya traveled by sea, contemplating a mysterious destination known as the Male Ranch. The ship eventually arrived at a bustling port, a grand city sprawling along the waterfront. Within the city, a doctor from the Western continent, Nil Martin, expressed her frustration, wondering why she was involved in such a gloomy task, while Kanzuya rested in a nearby bed. Several days prior, the teachings of the Danshili religion spoke of a grand institution. Peter explained that the Lunavail was said to require a special piano for its performance. Kanzuya questioned the need for a special piano, to which Peter affirmed, stating that without it, the Lunavail's true effects would not manifest. She then paused, hinting at a further complication. Luzier interjected, clarifying that this was merely a legend, and even she knew nothing more beyond that. Kanzuya, processing the information, prompted them to continue. He reacted with profound shock as the term male ranch was uttered. Luzier, seemingly unfazed by his reaction, calmly asked if he meant the facility for raising men, leaving Kanzuya utterly bewildered and demanding an explanation. He recoiled in shock, a wave of fear washing over him as the implications of the male ranch settled in. If a child was born female, they were raised in the family home, but if male, they were sent to the ranch. He then wondered aloud about Peter and the others. Luzier, observing his distress, confirmed his suspicions, stating that all the boys were indeed bought from the ranch. The realization solidified in his mind. Meanwhile, back at the residence, Luzier informed Nil Martin that the procedures for the Western continent were underway, and it was time for their boys to undergo their regular checkups. Nil Martin acknowledged this with a surprised exclamation. Nil Martin then proposed an idea, suggesting that Kanzuya should accompany them for the checkups. The thought seemed to strike her as a sudden, brilliant solution. And so, he found himself traveling to Matega, the territory where the ranch was located, accompanying Peter and the others for their checkups. The city, built upon canals, stretched out before him. Upon their arrival, he and Peter, along with several other boys, walked through the bustling streets of Matega, taking in the sights of the unique city. As they continued, he observed that this city seemed to have ordinary men present, a detail that caught his attention. Peter, noticing his curiosity, quickly cautioned him, whispering that it was better not to speak too loudly here. He looked at her, puzzled, and asked why. She explained that it was simply the custom of the place. As she spoke, he looked down, realizing he had dropped something. He let out a small gasp of surprise. He quickly bent down to retrieve the fallen item, a small, folded piece of cloth, and extended it towards Peter, informing her that she had dropped it. She quickly shushed him, her finger pressed to her lips, a gesture that left him utterly speechless. He pondered the strange, unsettling feeling that had begun to creep over him since their arrival in Matega. This disagreeable sensation was unlike anything he had felt with Algiers or Luzier, a pervasive unease that clung to the very air of the canal city. As he continued to reflect, Nil Martin addressed him, her voice firm but with a hint of apology, reminding him of his assigned number, 02839. She then sternly warned the boys against speaking freely, emphasizing the need for caution in their words. As Kanzuya observed the scene, a new identification tag now hanging from his neck. He looked down at the tag, emblazoned with the numbers 02839 and 6EB20, and a chilling thought crossed his mind. Were they being treated like prisoners, or perhaps even livestock, in this place that called itself a ranch? As he walked, the realization settled in that he was now to be called by a number, a stark departure from any previous experience. Their destination, a grand, imposing structure, was identified as a hospital. Kanzuya, Peter, and the other boys entered the building, the heavy doors closing behind them with a definitive thud. Inside the long corridor, Kanzuya called out to Peter, who turned to face him, awaiting his words. Peter, still standing in the corridor, responded to Kanzuya's question about the boy by the door, explaining that he was there simply to open it. Kanzuya, perplexed, pressed for more details. As they continued to move forward in the line with the other boys, Kanzuya observed the scene, a woman's heeled shoe visible as she was led, and the boy standing by the door, ready to perform his duty. He pondered the implications of such a simple, yet rigid, custom. He turned back to Peter, his expression still questioning, and asked if that was truly the extent of it. Peter, however, seemed to find his confusion puzzling. She clarified, stating that here, opening doors was simply a man's job. Kanzuya's eyes widened slightly in a silent acknowledgement of the stark reality. A grim understanding settled upon Kanzuya's face as he absorbed the full weight of her words. The unsettling feeling he had experienced upon arriving in this place now made perfect sense. It was because they, the men, were not treated as human beings. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice calling out a number 02839, to the examination room. As he began to move towards the designated room, Kanzuya passed another boy who was diligently opening a door for Luzier, who offered a polite thank you as she entered. He observed the boy, noting the complete lack of reaction on his face, as if he had become an extension of the door itself, devoid of individual will. Kanzuya entered the examination room, offering a quiet apology for the intrusion. Inside, Nil Martin sat at a desk, grumbling audibly about the tediousness of her work. He stood before her, observing the woman who was apparently a doctor in charge of the men, as she continued to complain about something under her breath. He stood in the examination room, listening as Nil Martin grumbled to herself about her superior qualifications, lamenting that she, the most excellent, had to deal with a country bumpkin man. He attempted to interject. She sharply turned her head, her glasses glinting as she questioned why he was speaking to her. He stammered, explaining that he had been called there. She ignored his explanation, instead focusing on a document in her hand, muttering his identification number, 02839, and remarking that he was doing whatever he wanted again. She wondered aloud if she was losing her mind. Her complaints continued, expressing how truly annoying it was for her to have to deal with him, especially since he was only there to talk. Then, with a dismissive gesture, she instructed him to take this, a small, cylindrical object, to the back room and attach it to the machine there. He looked on, clearly bewildered. She clarified her instruction, bluntly telling him to extract semen and bring it back to her. His eyes widened in shock. He held the cylindrical device, its internal mechanism visible, his expression one of utter bewilderment and shock. A young girl observes Kazuya playing a piano, contemplating the unique requirements of the Lunavail score, which demands a special instrument. The narrative shifts to a grand view of a bustling port city on the western continent, revealing the purpose of the journey, to find the special piano and extract its essence. Meanwhile, Nil Martin, identified as a doctor from the western continent, sternly instructs Kazuya to quickly proceed to the back room. He appears confused by her sudden command. She leans in, her gaze sharp, questioning if this is truly his first examination, implying that a man of his age should be familiar with such procedures. Kazuya affirms her assumption. With a frustrated exclamation, Kazuya quickly moves away, internally lamenting the doctor's irritating demeanor, yet resolving to comply. Nil Martin, now alone, holds a small, flat instrument, a subtle smile playing on her lips as she prepares for what is to come. Her eye gleams with a determined intensity as she declares a specific numerical code, 02839, indicating a precise plan or procedure. Kazuya walks down a long corridor lined with various figures, holding a strange device and pondering Nil Martin's instructions to attach it to a machine, unsure of its true purpose. He approaches a bald man, hesitantly asking if he has found the correct room for his task. Oham correca permanis silencioso, ofreciendo ninhuma resposta imediata. Kazuya expresses surprise at the man's complete silence, prompting a slight, questioning sound from the bald figure. He was still with the silent bald man. The man gestured towards an open door, and Kazuya questioned if that was the correct direction. He offered a polite bow, expressing his thanks, yet a thought lingered in his mind about whether he might be scolded for something. Stepping through the doorway, he found himself in a long room lined with what appeared to be individual stalls, similar to those found in a public restroom, a sight that elicited a surprised exclamation from him. He stood amidst the peculiar environment, his expression a mix of bewilderment and unease as he took in the rows of identical compartments. His eyes widened slightly, a silent gasp escaping him as the strangeness of his surroundings fully registered. Just then, a woman in a nurse's uniform appeared, calling out the code 02839. Kazuya, still clutching the mysterious device, turned to face her. She urgently instructed him to quickly remove his clothes and attach the device. He looked at a complex apparatus mounted on the wall, wondering if that was indeed where the device was meant to be installed. Following the instructions, he connected the mysterious device, a flexible tube extending from it, and attaching to the wall-mounted mechanism with a distinct thunk. The scene shifted, revealing the grand, ornate exterior of a large building, its architecture suggesting a place of significant importance or history. Back inside, Kazuya's face was streaked with tears, his eyes squeezed shut in profound distress, the emotional toll of the recent events clearly visible. He felt a strange, squeezing sensation, as if something was being wrung out of him. He clutched the mysterious device, his face contorted in distress. His distress was evident as Peter, concerned, asked if he was all right. Luzier, equally worried, lamented the blow to his dignity, understanding his reluctance to continue. Just as they spoke, the nurse, with a stern expression, ordered them out of the room, directing them back to the original examination area. Kazuya, Peter, and Luzier quickly complied. As they were ushered away, Peter and Luzier offered Kazuya words of caution, telling him to be careful. He looked away, feeling that such advice was futile now. He continued to clutch the device, the strange sensation still lingering, and wondered what good it was to be told to be careful now, after what he had just experienced. His thoughts drifted, recalling a time when he had already been burned, already experienced the worst. From this point, he mused, nothing could truly surprise him anymore. He sat at a piano, a vast, ornate structure in the background, filled with countless figures. More than the piano, his mind focused on the need to quickly infiltrate the male ranch and locate the piano's true position, a place that would lead him back to his original world. He reached for a door handle, determined. As he opened the door, he was met with a surprising sight. Dr. Nil Martin stood before him, her back turned, her long hair flowing down. He uttered a small sound of surprise. He looked at her, a question forming on his lips, his expression a mix of confusion and mild alarm. He stood in the doorway, still holding the handle, when Dr. Nil Martin, without turning, addressed him by a number, 02839, and asked why he was trying to escape. He was instructed to hand over the collected sample, to which he meekly agreed. Moments later, his wrists were secured in heavy handcuffs, the metal clinking shut with a definitive sound. Confused by the sudden turn of events, he looked around, his gaze falling upon a woman with long, dark hair who stood in the room, her back to him. He questioned the situation, but she offered no immediate explanation. The scene shifted abruptly, and the sharp, metallic snap of tongs echoed, a chilling sound that seemed to punctuate the unsettling silence. Back in the present, Dr. Nil Martin, now in her lab coat, looked down at him with a stern expression, holding the very same type of tongs. He stood in the doorway, startled by her presence and the instrument in her hand, as she commanded him to sit there, stating it was already decided. His face contorted with a mix of confusion and fear, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. His gaze then drifted to a nearby tray, where an array of gleaming medical instruments lay meticulously arranged, each one sharp and precise. Dr. Nil Martin, observing his reaction, offered a chilling, unsettling smile, bringing the tongs to her mouth as she declared that he must absolutely obey the doctor's words. She then turned and walked away, explaining that this was the hospital's rule, and therefore, she would. Her chilling words echoed in the empty room, completing her threat. From that moment on, she would dissect him. He recoiled, his body tensing as Dr. Nil Martin advanced, a long pointer extended menacingly towards him. Her expression was cold, utterly devoid of empathy, as if he were merely an object for study. Her face then contorted into a chilling, almost gleeful smile, her eyes glinting behind her glasses as she reiterated her sinister intent. Dissection.